Can't get it.
Seeing a quorum of voting members, I call to order the June 17th Cincinnati School Board meeting. Treasurer Wagner, would you please call an attendance roll for us?
Mr. Craig,
Here.
Mr. Lindy,
Here, but online.
Ms. Mapp,
Here.
Dr. Moffat.
Here.
Mr. Morosky, Vice President Weinberg.
Here.
President Bolton.
Present. Vice President Weinberg, would you please explain the process for the audience to use regarding virtual hearing of the public?
Yes, absolutely. So members of the public who are online and wish to speak during our hearing of the public this evening may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your request for 5 minutes. If you would like a direct response to your questions, please make sure to share your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and also your contact information.
Thank you. The chair will now entertain a motion and a second to approve the June 17th business meeting agenda. Do I hear a motion and a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President Weinberg.
Second.
Second, thank you, Dr. Moffat. Treasurer Wagner, would you please call the voting roll?
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Mapp,
Yes.
Dr. Moffat,
Yes.
Vice President Weinberg,
Yes.
President Bolton.
Yes. Tonight's agenda has been approved as posted. New business, our next item is that do any members have any acknowledgements or announcements? I know that eventually the interim superintendent will be sharing with us some retirements. But before we do that, any board members have any announcements or acknowledgements that they'd like to make? Seeing none. Interim Superintendent Murphy, would you please share with us what you have to share regarding retirements and anything else?
Absolutely. Happy to share the following certificated personnel with retirements from Covedale, a teacher, Consuelos Estevez, an intervention specialist, Cheryl McBee, a employee from the school culture team, social worker, Jan Phipps, occupational therapist from the Department of Student Services, Sharon Plummer, principal at Parker Woods, Whitney Simmons Newton, a teacher at Sailor Park, Susan Squires, a teacher at Western Hills High School, Lori Thrasher, and a principal at Aiken High School, Lisa Vota. Those are the retirements. I do have some acknowledgements, if I may add on
Please
to
do.
those. And those are on the slide deck. I think you have that, Rob. A few things as he's pulling up the slide. I think you have the slide deck, no? But as Rob is pulling that up, I do want to acknowledge this Saturday at Juneteenth. Cincinnati Public Schools did have a booth at Eden Park, and I want to say thank you publicly to both Rolanda Smith and LaRonda Thomas for coordinating those efforts. Thank you kindly. And if there isn't a slide deck, I want to acknowledge Roberts Academy for.
He just found it.
He did find it. Okay, great. So
Maybe.
Roberts Academy has earned Achiever Verification status as an International Baccalaureate Middle Years Program World School. They also recently received word that their application for candidacy for the primary years program has been approved. So congratulations to Roberts Academy. In addition to that, on the next slide, I want to acknowledge Robert A. Taft Information Technology High School. Their track and field team finished 4th in the state this spring. And the Learning Technologies team, we want to acknowledge on the next slide that they did hold their annual Innovative Practices Conference at Aiken High School. Congratulations to those schools, departments, and teams.
All right. Madam Vice President, the chair is yours.
All righty. We are now at the item in our agenda for hearing of the public. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and will address all comments to the presiding officer. If you're online, once a request to speak has been granted, you will be invited to enter. You should click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community and topic, and your contact information if you'd like a response to any questions that you might have. This request is consistent with board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we reserve the right to end that person's time. Again, each person has 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up, and please refrain from discussing any personal items. After speaking, if you're online, you'll briefly see the welcome screen as you transition back to the live stream of this meeting. Finally, we ask that your public commentary be respectful of all listeners. And tonight, I'm going to ask, how many speakers, Mr. Wilson, do we have online?
To the Vice Chair, we have 1.
Okay, so we will go ahead and start with that first speaker. But before we begin with the first speaker, I am going to have 2 individuals to come on down and have a seat at the 2 chairs here next to the podium. I have Jeff Sutton and Joanne Morse. So if you could go ahead and make your way down, then we will go ahead and get started with the online person. Thank you so much.
Great. Our 1 speaker tonight online is Holly Miller. Holly, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Holly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, hi, thank you. My name's Holly Miller, and I am reaching out to the board in regards to extended school year services this year. So I did send an email on June 6th, and I haven't heard anything back, but we received a pay rate in writing, and we went to fill out our time cards, and that pay rate was $5 less than what we were told in writing. So I wanted to make everyone aware of that. I know the district is in a lot of financial distress right now. However, I do feel like it's unfair to lower salaries by over $5 an hour without letting us know. Additionally, about 5 years ago, we were all overpaid, and that money had to be paid back out of our December paycheck, the check right before Christmas. And the justification that was given at that time was what was in writing stood. And so we did all have to pay those monies back at that time. So my concern is how this happened, and I would like the district to rectify it if possible. There are many of us that put our children in costly programming for summer so that we could do this work, which is not summer school. It is extended school year services. It's federally mandated and federally funded. So I feel like we should receive the pay we were told we would initially receive. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Our next speaker we will have is Jeff Sutton. You can come on up to the podium and the mic should already be on for you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sutton. I'm the chair of the LSDMC at Douglas School, and I'm also a volunteer at Spencer and occasionally at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts. My concern is about the ad hoc committee. This morning, there was nothing about the ad hoc committee online. this afternoon, that there is a document from the ad hoc committee which seems to say that certain decisions have been made, that Spencer will move to Riverside and so on. And I just want to say that we kept hearing that the school board was going to engage on these questions, and to see a document which appears to say that the decisions have been made without any invitation that I'm aware of to discuss this is really discouraging to me.
Thank you so much. Next speaker is Joanne Morse.
Thank you. President Bolton, interim, Superintendent Murphy, other board members. I'm a resident of Walnut Hills, and I also volunteer regularly at Frederick Douglass School, at Spencer Education Center, and at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts. I was happy to see the agenda item about the engagement plan, because I've been wondering when when the board would again talk about that engagement plan. I know that the committee did amazing, creative, intense work, and I don't want that to be lost. At the same time, I know that I speak for residents of Walnut Hills, such as the LSDMCs, the area council, the business group, other concerned citizens. We want to be engaged with you. We want to understand what's going on, how these decisions are being made. And it's always easier to be constructive in that engagement when we're invited in early rather than at the end of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next set of speakers, if you can make your way down, I think it's Teresa Culberson, Leslie R., Dave Bloxam, Nikki S., and then Missy L. And I'm sorry if I do not have your last name correct. You can also repeat it when you come up. So just come around this way to the front where there are seats available. And I will call the names again in that order, hopefully. Teresa would be first. Leslie would be second. Dave would be third. Nikki would be fourth. And then Missy would be last. Teresa, you are up. Mic is all yours.
Thank you all for listening. I'm a taxpayer. I know you all have budget problems. So my question is that we have seen the
And if you could just speak up a little
Sure.
bit into the mic.
We've
Yes.
seen the proposed lease between the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation and Cincinnati Public School. And in this lease, it says that CTF is asking for no more than $200,000 assistance in parking, which means a new lot. It's still money that, according to the late May CPS budget board meeting, the district does not have the funding set aside for broader facility repairs and upgrades as reported in a 2023 fact finding. Only essential maintenance is being done. Is not paying for a parking lot, new, an upgrade. My other question from the proposed lease has to do with CPS paying for reasonable utilities, sewage, blah, blah, blah. Reasonable is really nebulous. When my son was in high school, I didn't tell him to be home at a reasonable time. I told him to be home at midnight because reasonable might be 4 a.m. to him. So maybe some numbers are needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Leslie, and then Leslie, how do you say your last name?
You say Rosh.
Rosh. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
I was just here 2 weeks ago and basically going to say the same thing. I live on Kendall Avenue. Been there for many, many years. And there's a group, a huge group, in fact, which I have flyers that people have petitions that all the neighborhood has signed. A lot, not all, but most of the neighborhood has signed. We are totally against the indoor tennis court. We are not against tennis. I love tennis, always have loved tennis. The issue is this huge intrusive building that's going to be going up feet from our property line. We are concerned and appalled really that it's really that it may occur. I know that last time 2 weeks ago that Principal Gray had said that he thinks that the students deserve this indoor court. Well, I think they deserve exposure to many sports, and as all children do. And right now that area is used constantly by family, by other sports teams, practicing. They had archery there the other day. They have, it's amazing how many sports are actually being dealt with there. And that's going to be gone. It's going to be a huge parking lot and this monstrous building that goes up 32 to 37 feet high, depending on who you talk to and what model they're talking to of the day. Our group was not told that this was going to occur today. I found out at 4:30 when I got home that this was going to be voted on. I guess it's embedded somewhere in there. I could not find it on the agenda. If it is not going to be voted on, great. Then we can all get together as our group again, because I know I have not heard from Mr. Dekos, and I know most people have not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dave. And Dave, is that Bloxham?
Bloxham, yes.
Bloxham.
Yeah, I'm the president of Withrow Alumni Association. I've been president for the past 6 years. Withrow alumni very strongly support the proposed new indoor tennis building and court restoration at Withrow. It is truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity for not only Withrow, but the entire East Side CPS community. Withrow alumni has been a partner of the Cincinnati Tennis Foundation for the past 2 years, as they have worked tirelessly to restart the tennis program at Withrow. Tennis has evolved in the past 50 years, with some of America's recent top tennis players being Black and female, which gives our female student athletes another sport in which to compete. In order for this program to continue to grow, we need an indoor facility so that our student athletes can practice year-round. Our Kendall Avenue neighbors have stated that our students can just share the Walnut Hills indoor facility, but there's no way that will work. We seriously doubt that there will be any workable times available in that facility for Withrow players to practice, and we would also have to deal with transportation issues between the schools. We need our own facility. We have been a part of the meeting with our Kendall Avenue neighbors, both at the Withrow Alumni Center and at the Hyde Park Neighborhood Council meeting. I personally understand their NIMBY concerns about the facilities, and CTF has made adjustments to answer those concerns. Their main concern is that the new building will block their views. We're not sure that that's a valid reason for opposing this project. Technically, there are no view restrictions in the zoning for that area. In addition to the much-needed indoor tennis courts, CTF will be completely restoring the asphalt courts so that they can be safely used at least 6 to 8 months out of the year. The complex also includes much-needed auxiliary office and classroom space, as well as restroom facilities and desperately needed parking. If you've been to a football game or other large event at Withrow, you understand our parking needs. And to have a restroom out by the fields that our student athletes and guests of the building can use is a much added bonus.
Thank you so much.
And I just wanted to say that I do have many of our alumni board members with us tonight to represent.
Thank you. Our next speaker, is it Nikki?
And the last name is Shakerin.
Thank you so much.
So my name is Nikki Shakerin, and I'm a teacher at Pleasant Ridge Montessori. I've also served as the education lead with Cincinnati Tennis Foundation programs at Withrow since 2021. Today, I want to share why these programs are so critical for our students and why this project is so important for CPS. Having experience with teaching kids both on and off the courts, I have been given the opportunity to observe the power and importance of these programs. For many of our students, tennis is more than just a sport. It offers them a safe space to grow, learn, and develop skills that extend far beyond the court. These programs teach our children important life skills, including discipline, perseverance, and teamwork. They learn how to set goals and build a pathway to achieve them. The confidence they build on the court translates into the classroom and vice versa. This has been true for our players and for student coaches who we have hired from Withrow. One of our coaches has been with us since I started in 2021, and now she is headed into her senior year at Withrow. It's been so much fun being able to see her take on more leadership roles with all of the newer coaches that have joined us. CTF provides essential education supports that ensures our students are not only physically active, but also mentally prepared for the challenges of their future. As a coach and teacher, I've been given the privilege to watch young players grow into life champions. I've seen them take lessons they have learned on the court and apply it to everyday life. I have seen them develop resilience, taking a loss of a match and turning it into a learning opportunity, not only hoping to improve the next time, but learning the value of hard work and the joy of personal achievement, and not always playing to win. For our youth, these programs open doors to opportunities that might otherwise remain closed, such as college scholarships, a career in sports management, coaching, and even more. But perhaps most importantly, they instill a sense of community and possibility. CTF programs are not just about developing athletes, they are about building future leaders. They provide our children with the tools they need to succeed both on and off the court, shaping them into confident, capable, and compassionate individuals, creating year-round opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then our next speaker, Missy.
Lawlathan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Missy Lawlathan, and I'm here on behalf of CTF and our family's relationship with them. For background purposes, my husband and I have 3 sons, and with 3 boys, you can imagine the presence sports has in our daily lives. It's always been important to us for them to have exposure to sports for their physical and mental health. However, our middle son, Ben, right over there, glasses and green shirt, was born with a neuromuscular disease, leaving him unable to independently walk and using a wheelchair for mobility purposes. We've learned how to navigate this journey with the help of his doctors, but one area we struggled with was how to still have him to participate in sports. Allowing him to just sit on the sidelines and watch his brothers was not good enough for us. However, if you all are like us previously and not familiar with the world of adaptive sports, let me educate you. There's not many options available, and what is available is often way north of the city, which with a busy family schedule like us is not possible. Enter CTF. I'll never forget when we first discovered it and found out that it was so close at Withrow High School. We started Ben there and it has been absolutely blown us away. Ben is truly connected with Coach Zach, who's also back there sitting with Ben, and finally has a true role model in the world of adaptive sports. It's given him an opportunity to connect with other children who are also in wheelchairs while learning the lessons that can be taught through sports. CTF is an amazing program that will only continue to further benefit our children through both their regular and adaptive programs. It's offering opportunities to these children that otherwise would not have it offered to them. I have no idea if Ben will end up being a professional tennis player, but what I do know is that CTF is allowing him to have the presence of his sports in his life, and it's made his life and ours better because of it. Thank you for your time. I also brought a picture that Ben keeps framed in his room of his wheelchair tennis group. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our last speaker is Julie Sellers. That is a really loud noise. Do we have any other noise choices?
Some
Like a
bells.
little buzz, you know?
That thing.
So almost scared me there.
Good evening, members of the board, superintendent, and treasurer. I don't have any prepared statement this evening, but I want to say that in the last 2 to 3 weeks, the district is under such a different feel that it's unbelievable it's the same district. We have been having meetings once or twice a week, finding ways to cut millions and millions of dollars from the budget. And with the understanding of all of the unions working together, we've been able to do that. It's been collaborative, it's been respectful and professional. And I will just say that I have not seen this for a long time, probably since before COVID. And it's great that our district is back on the right track, that we can move forward and actually make the changes we need to make for the district. I know at the last meeting, I said, I don't think you should be wasting your time or money looking for a new superintendent because we already have one. And so as you're talking about making this, do this search,
we've never really had a successful superintendent who's come from outside of the city. And I'm going back probably 40 years. And so I would just like to think twice. Cincinnati is a different city and we have a different kind of support in this city for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We have come to the end, and I just would like to thank all of our speakers tonight for coming up.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We'll go now to our presentations for tonight. We have a few, and they will be led by our interim superintendent and our treasurer, and any other guests that they may have invited along the way, or staff members to help or with the presentations. Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam President. Today, we're going to have a conversation about Goal 1, third grade reading, Goal 2, sixth grade reading, Goal 5, graduation and interims, and Guardrail 5, chronic absenteeism and interims. Thank you, Rob. Let's go to the next slide and the next slide. So Goal 1, just as a reminder, the percent of third graders reading proficient in reading on the Ohio State test will increase from 47.5% in June 2023 to 61% by June 2027. And on the next slide, you will be able to see the difference there, and you will see a bit of improvement. And our team feels that this goal is on track. I don't know, Madam Chair, if you want me to pause in between each goal or guardrail or continue on.
Keep going, and I'll trust these folks to interact.
Absolutely.
Need to.
So, Rob, okay, next we're going to talk about our key takeaways and next steps. Gains this year have been seen, meaning more students are reading proficiently. Our Black, Hispanic, and multiracial student groups all saw solid double-digit gains year over year, and they are building a really strong foundation to build on for next school year, and we plan to continue to help them accelerate their growth. Our next steps and what we're doing right now is reviewing that data, and we are continuing to emphasize Tier 1 curriculum and interventions and supports, and we're preparing to set those goals for the future when the kids return in the fall. Next slide, please. So Goal 2, the current reading gap proficiency between sixth grade Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students and sixth grade white students on the Ohio State test will shrink from 47.4% in June 2023 to 27% in June 2027. I'm excited to share that we believe this goal is also on track. Our key takeaways, similar to the first goal we discussed, strong decline in the equity gap from winter to spring, combined proficiency increase driven in large part by the huge growth of our Hispanic students. Need to ensure future reductions in the equity gap are not achieved through decreases in proficiency for white students. We've already surpassed the 2024-25 target. Our next steps, again, review our data thoroughly, continue to emphasize the use of Tier 1 curriculum, and prepare to set growth goals in the fall. Goal 5, the percent of students who meet the requirements for graduation will increase from 80.8% in June 2022 to 97% by June 2027. Our team believes this goal is on track. And the next slide, please, Rob. All right, so this one, Goal 5A, the percent of school year 23 10th grade students who are on track each year with credits for graduation will increase by 85% by May 2025. So you'll see the data here might be a little concerning that they are off track. But I think there are a couple of things that I would point out here, and there is a small footnote. Please remember, students are still doing summer recovery right now, so that by the time we return in August and have August graduation, we may and should see improvement there. I'll pause for questions.
Yes, thank you, President Bolton. I want to go back to goal one, with the third grade, proficiency in reading for the OST. So we're seeing that growth is happening and we are on track. My question is, what do you think is working in this area in terms of the growth or that's supporting this growth? But then I am also concerned about just the difference between our white students in comparison to our Black and Hispanic students. What can we strengthen there to help close that gap?
So to the A portion of your question, I think some of those answers are in the key takeaways with those students and what we plan to do next in terms of making sure that the kids are getting the solid tier 1 instruction. So continuing to improve how teachers look at the curriculum, how students view the curriculum, how they implement the curriculum moving forward. And I would say that across the board for all subgroups that we may have. And then for your B portion, if that's okay, the gap with the white students, I think it's an access question. So I think that the more we're able to provide all of our students with equal access, the better they'll be, the stronger they'll be in the test scores, in the reading material. So it's not necessarily how smart they are, what they can achieve, what they can accomplish, but the more we're able to identify whether it's a social and economic gap or just something they have not been exposed to, the better off they'll be.
Thank you. And then my next question pertaining to this is, what are we noticing in terms of trends as it pertains to our preschool students, our kindergarten students as they're matriculating up to ensure that they are on track with by the time they take the third grade state
So,
test?
yeah, I think that's a great question. Now, we did begin this work a few years ago with younger students and being prepared to read by second grade. So while I don't have that data in front of me here, we probably could pull how even our first graders are doing, our second graders are doing. I'm going to even drill down to preschool. I know this board has discussed this before, but Ms. Indalacio and the deputy and I have talked about highlighting this even more. Even with our preschool learners, we have a literacy program in place that we just have not had a chance to highlight very much with Leading Men Fellows and those young Black and brown males ages 18 to 24 working with our preschoolers. The data that we saw last year is incredible. And so I really would like to have the opportunity to share that with you and talk with you more about how we want to grow those opportunities for our youngest learners.
Thank you for that. I do have some additional questions, but I'll defer to one of you all and I'll come back to it.
Mr. Craig?
So I want to go to the goal 5A that we were just at.
Yes.
And I think, so one, I have one question that is just really about, we've talked about this before, and I think President Bolton's described it probably more accurately in the sense that we don't have, you don't do credit, you don't do educational recovery, right? From students who lost out on COVID. Now it's really about getting them proficient in that sense. And I'm wondering if the students who we're measuring their numbers with regards to these 10th and 11th graders now are still kind of the remnants of us getting caught up from the students who transitioned from elementary school to high school during that COVID era, right?
Yeah.
Where we didn't always have all the resources to really be able to fully guide them from home, right? In that same sense. So I don't know if your thoughts are on that aspect of the numbers we're seeing for 5A.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. I know at the time my granddaughter did kindergarten from home and that was just challenging. So just imagine as you are in junior high, junior high is challenging, which will speak to some of the needs for a future presentation around that work. And it certainly would be an amazing study to do with a cohort of kids to see what it was like coming through that time in our society. So I agree with you 100%. There has to be remnants of not being in school, in front of your teacher, with your classmates doing school as we traditionally know school. I think parents might say the same.
I think the other point that I would certainly want to raise to this is that we're getting closer, absolutely getting closer. But I do think one of the challenges, at least I've seen teachers talk about, and I heard students talk about, which is just that there is so much that is gained from being in the classroom, so much that is gained from having somebody who can sit down and talk to you about the problems as you're doing the work that you just don't get anywhere else, right? And so I think it's a credit to everyone else, everyone in the school, everyone who's working with our students to really get them back on track. But I'm wondering if we can also maybe look at the grades that follow to see whether or not we see a different trend, right? For those
Yeah.
students who might be coming in over the next 2 years behind them, what we might see is that that number may have a difference in response based on what they were allowed to do, what they were able to do, and where they were in their process. Because I do think we've seen some numbers to show 3rd through 6th, we're starting to see some catch up, if not exceeding in some points. Now, maybe it's a question of the 7 through 12, what are they looking at? And where does that number flip for them as well?
I like that and I appreciate that because I think we all understand in education, that teacher can make all the difference in the world, that one single teacher and that impact that they have in that one school year in terms of the trajectory of the rest of the school years that child may experience. Something great to look at.
I mean, one other question, but I think it actually gets into the slide that you haven't gotten to yet. So I will maybe ask the question, but then let you present the slide and answer it from that. But
Sure.
With regard to the seals for graduation, I think that is a system and a measurement that we haven't really had the time to get all of our students prepared for and our parents understand and everybody be ready to deal with. And so I think it'd be helpful just to also explain a little bit of the steps we're taking, even as you are explaining the numbers, to constantly try and improve that. Because I remember being on the board when it's not that long ago that we were just now talking about what are the seals and what are the things that our students need to reach. And now as it's requirements and we put it in as part of our goals, I think it's helpful to understand what we were doing to recognize that we start out at a deficit because it's a new thing. And there's not necessarily a comparable in that same way that it would be for others.
I appreciate that. Go ahead, Ms. Weinberg, I'm sorry. The only thing I was going to say, the commentary I would give about seals as a former high school principal, when I was at Woodward, seals were essentially just being introduced. And so you're right, probably an opportunity to re-educate everyone about them and about the significance and the importance of them. One, two, making sure that we can identify them because there are kids who are doing seal-worthy work, if you would like to say, whether it is their volunteering, whether it is their employment, whether it is their participation in arts or extracurricular activities, all of those things count. I think on our end, there may be a question of, are we documenting this appropriately? Who is responsible? And we're digging into what the high school work looks like for this upcoming school year. And that you may remember the whole My Tomorrow scenario, just really digging in because there were great things that came out of that work as the treasurer is smiling. I don't know if she'll give me any money for it, but yeah, but just really putting a laser-like focus on high schools. And again, in the presentation later tonight, it may make sense why we want to kind of put more of a focus on some high school pieces. Thank you.
Madam Vice President?
Yeah, I would just like to add with Board Member Craig, when I was looking at some of the slides, my question to you would have been just to kind of give a little bit more of an explanation to why we're not on track, but hearing that it's so new and I think just really grasping that process and making sure that our students and our families understand what exactly are the seals and how to, accomplish them. I think moving forward, we will see a spike and it'll go up and I'm looking forward to seeing that data as well.
Yes, I'd be happy to create a presentation about seals for the board, for the public. We've had seals in the state of Ohio probably now about 6 or 7 years. So tender, not that tender, but tender. And I do think it's a question of understanding and the value. We've been used to earning credits. We've been used to paying student fees or not. And now this, and the test scores, of course. The seal piece, earning those seals, earning those credentials is another step. in making your way to graduation. So it's critically important because we do need the students to do this piece as well.
Other questions, comments? Member Matt?
So with the seals process, I know that there's gonna be a presentation and education kind of, discussion around that for families, as well as all of us. So I'm noticing that in the past, it was done cumulatively, but it will be a snapshot. Will there be discussions with the students, from like the counselors as we're tracking that data on how they can earn, the seals? Or how, like, what interventions are you thinking about will be in place for that?
Yes, absolutely. And I may ask board permission to bring back how we'll look at this a little more carefully, if that's okay. We do have graduation counselors in buildings. We do have counselors who are educated in this area, and there are other people as well. Our athletic directors, our resource coordinators, they may not talk about it, but they are very much connected to the work that leads kids to earning these seals. So we can broaden that scope a little bit.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Other questions for the superintendent?
All right. Good. We don't have to spend that much time on what's off track. So then there's the slide about our key takeaways and our next step. So again, of course, we will continue to monitor and scale in schools opportunities for seals, although I do believe that that's very broad. I think it can definitely be deepened and strengthened. And when we will also improve the students on track for both the credits and the seals. Again, by the end of the summer, I expect that number of credits to increase because of summer recovery. All right, Rob, I think we're on guardrail 5. The superintendent will not
we have a
ignore
question.
this. Oh, apologize. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
So this is pertaining to graduation. Just one quick question. So I know we are tracking where we are, but just kind of future processing. Do we identify how our students are progressing after graduation? Like, do we track whether they are being retained in college? I know that there was a partnership, at least in the past, I don't know if it's still occurring with like UC as well as CPS to make sure specifically during like the summer melt time that they have those resources and supports in place. So I was just wondering, do we still support our students or identify how they are excelling after graduation?
There are at least 3 pieces I can share with you. I will not say at this point, I believe they're systematic for us. And so there is an area of opportunity there. 1, our Project Connect students are followed multiple years after graduation. 2, our students who are involved in Jobs for Cincinnati graduates are followed from multiple years after graduation. And then 3, as you mentioned, Board Member Matt, the UC program helps us with following our kids. Also, UC Blue Ash does a great job with that. We did have in place, and I'll have to follow up with our secondary ed team, a summer melt program to help avoid losing kids in between high school and that first year, as well as the first to second year. We also put in, this is the 4th thing, a few years ago, the college career community resource to help with just that, but I'd have to check with them to see what the data is with their work.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right.
All right. All right, guardrail 5, again, the superintendent will not ignore district-wide chronic absenteeism at school sites, paying special attention to family involvement. So this chart that you see next is broken down by quarter, and then you can see the highlight for semester. We do feel like the work that is being done in our positive school culture team is yielding positive results, having the growth thanks to the support of the board, of school social workers in every school, and we do have attendance clerks spread throughout the district. So on the next slide, you'll see the percent of K-12 students with chronic absenteeism decreasing, and we find that to be on track. And then on the next slide, it specifically hones in on the K-12 students who are Black or African American with chronic absenteeism decreasing. We find that also to be on track. And then finally, in the area of chronic absenteeism, our Hispanic students, K through 12, also seeing a decrease, therefore on track. Our key takeaways and next steps. All student groups saw improvement year over year, just missing slightly the 23-24 target, but on track for the ultimate goal. Our Hispanic students improved both quarter 3 and quarter 4, surpassing the 23-24 goal. And we have had, as I mentioned earlier, a deep focus on chronic absenteeism with our social workers, our attendance clerks, and believe that their hard work is paying off. Kudos and congratulations to the attendance clerks and the school social workers. Our next step is to continue to refine the work that's being done around absenteeism with our social workers, improving education for families on the importance of attending and counting those hours. That's also another way to look at the attendance that's different from when a lot of the parents were in school. And then finally, launching the Stay in the Game partnership through FC Cincinnati. There was a question about that a little bit earlier. This is similar to some of the partnerships with professional athletics and school districts that happens in other parts of the state and other parts of the country. This FC picked up this work around the attendance a little bit different from the Marvin Lewis Foundation, when his focus was on elevating and honoring children who are making honor roll. So when Mr. Lewis left Cincinnati, that work kind of went away, and FC was able to pick up a bit with the absenteeism.
Mr. Craig.
So I think this is one of those areas where we have, it's a part of it that's education, right? To let parents know about what does it mean to be chronically absent, because I know folks who pull their kids out because their kids are sick, right? Which is what we want them to do, because we don't want them bringing their kids germs and illnesses into the school to be shared. But then that also means you do that a couple times in a semester, you do one family trip in a semester, now you're at 7 days, right? And anything else after that becomes the potential for your child to be chronically absent in the semester. And so I think one of the hopeful things that we're seeing is the education has started to benefit those parents who are making decisions as to when their kids come, don't come, when they do family trips, these type of things. But I do think one of the areas that may potentially be still that missing link in there are those families who don't have stable housing. And the ability to get those kids from where their unstable housing is to the building still is just a challenge, right? It's always going to be a challenge. It's something we were never going to fully solve until we end poverty and homelessness, right? So, and in some ways, I just hope maybe you can shed a little thought on, because we are seeing a growth we saw a decrease with Hispanic students, and that may have a lot to do with the resources that we're pumping out to educate the parents in their native language, to give them stuff that they'll understand and be able to get them there. But I think for some of the other students who face things like homelessness or at least housing instability, what are our thoughts as to how do we kind of start to shift that space connected to some things like chronic absenteeism?
So it's so interesting that you bring this up, and you'll appreciate this. You were just referring to the academic impacts of COVID. Well, when we were going through COVID, we said, please, if you have the sniffles, if you have a cough, please stay home. And so that message became embedded, right? And so now we're trying to shift a little bit so that kids do come to school, right? So I think a couple of things. One, before I talk about the amazing Rebecca Beach, our partnership with Cincinnati Children's Hospital is critically important. The reason it's critically important is because they work with us on things like, are we helping kids who have asthma? And what are the impacts of it? The fewer asthma episodes children can have, the better their attendance. So the more we can educate our staff, our families, helping those children, the better off we'll be. So this is one of many reasons why we want to keep a solid relationship with Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Secondly, I will share with you that this past school year, we have seen the greatest number of our children experiencing homelessness in a long time. Rebecca Beach, who is the manager of our Project Connect, would tell you at one time we seriously worried about kids who were sleeping in cars. And you know this too, Board Member Craig. Now we worry about kids sleeping under bridges every day. Every day. So you're right, it is a serious concern to assist our families with stable housing. We did add a housing specialist to the Project Connect team. That work had been grant funded and was scheduled to end this school year, but working with the treasurer's office, with Mr. Burkhart's office, we were able to come up with dollars to be able to keep that housing specialist in place. So we'll keep deepening those services, and we will also keep partnering with the agencies around the city who also work with our children and families experiencing homelessness, including the city of Cincinnati.
I think the one other point that I will make, and I think President Bolden will appreciate this, is that I know that we have used our health services spaces within our schools for a lot of different resources. But I think one of the areas that we can continue to expand is that students miss days of school to do things like physicals for athletics.
Oh, yeah.
You know, or like, I gotta go to the eye doctor because I'm having issues, and these type of things that realistically, there may be ways for us to keep expanding those opportunities. Now, it may not be through expanding where those resources go to, and maybe more of figuring out how do we get students to some of those spaces or making those things available on certain times a year. But I know that's a large portion of also some of our chronic absenteeism is students who miss 2 or 3 hours a day, right? You get a doctor's appointment at 1 o'clock, you've now missed from like 11 till the end of school or things like that. So those may be other ways that we think about being creative in our fiscally smart way of also providing services to our students through some of these different spaces like our community health centers.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Other questions, comments? I'd like to piggyback on 2 of those items, most particularly to begin with on the health piece. There is no other district within 500 miles that spends more time trying to provide appropriate services for our children and our teenagers from a standpoint of health. And that is in part due not only to our commitment of the whole child, which dates back so many years, but it's also because of the phenomenal partnerships that we have had and the effort to actually going back to the Obama administration that charged hospitals with the responsibility of being home health care campuses as such, meaning if you wanted public funds, you had to kind of adopt other functions in other places. And one of the places that Cincinnati Hospital has adopted was to help with schools. And that's why we have 25 or so, in part, why we have 25 or 26 school-based health centers. And again, it's why I keep being concerned about how we're using our vans and getting back to our previous COVID numbers of health checks and eye checks and hearing checks. So it's an asset, and rather than always concentrate on what we're not doing, something that we're really doing well, let's really do it even better. I'm an assets person. I like to see where we're doing things very well and get even better and better and move towards that. The other one is attendance. The board will remember that we had to yell and scream and scrape to get attendance as one of the focus areas. And I do think what Member Craig brings up is it would really be helpful to the administration to zero down as best they possibly could, even if you had to devote people to do it, as to why students are absent and how many are absent for this reason or that reason or whatever. Because the way the state determines chronic absenteeism, as you've mentioned, does not take into account what kind of absence it was. And I know there is a state legislative effort to get it to where the chronic absenteeism is only based upon unexcused absences. But I do think that we could have our lobbyists work harder on that, but more particularly here at home, really, in order to face this issue of absences, we have to explain it to the public, as you mentioned, but also we have to get as specific to the data as we possibly can to fully understand what this is about. Dr. Moffett?
So thank you for this presentation, Superintendent Murphy, and I apologize, I had to go to the bathroom. So I left, but I have a question around the absenteeism piece. When you gave that example about educating the public locally, I think it's equally important to educate the students around what absenteeism is, because I happen to have had a great conversation with some students Saturday who were missed part of the last of school, and their parent was okay with it, but they said, oh, I just left a little early from school. Well, if you do that for 2 weeks, they didn't understand, and I wasn't proficient, but I tried to explain to them how hours add up to days, add up to them missing a significant amount of time, and they were unaware of that. So I think that that's an easy start, is to educate the kids that we already touch on what does it mean, and how is absenteeism being calculated? And we can probably measure that. Just say, hey, do you know what it means to be absent? You know, a quick little survey, and then have that something in advisory, if they still do advisory, or something simple. And then the parents that, we can roll that out to LSDMCs, we can roll that out to PTOs. I know that the parent champion said that they're gonna do that at the June 29th parent meeting, talk about seals, but maybe that's where we can start, where we touch parents and students quickly on educating around absenteeism and what the definition of chronic absenteeism, so that they can start to take some ownership in that. And then additionally, talk to our lobbyists and talk to the people that matter, but that's a bigger picture, the students we can touch immediately. Can you talk about if that's even feasible?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it might be a great theme for LSDMCs this year. It might be a great theme for PTOs. And even at the administration's level, creating celebrations for the kids with, after it's defined, good or excellent or perfect attendance is something we currently don't do as a district. At the school level, perhaps yes, but maybe there's a way to honor kids each quarter who are doing well coming to school. Maybe there's a way to acknowledge those parents who are doing well sending their kids to school. Maybe that's a project for LSDMC, for PTOs. Our champion is in the room. We're both taking copious notes. Yes.
I hate to add more work, but I just think it's an easy
It's
thing that
okay.
we could all do to start with, so for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can go ahead with the next presentation if we are all done with this one.
Next presentation. All right. So this next presentation is the result of the team, the administrative team, listening to this board, not only in the past few weeks, but really throughout the past school year, and listening to LSDMCs, listening to principals. And I would say that, having been the person working with LSDMCs the past several years, is even more long-term. So this is the next presentation. On the next slide, Rob, this is about district performance, redesign, sustainability, and growth, phase 1. And so I want to start with the Spencer Center for Gifted and Exceptional Children. And all right, next slide, Rob, please. Here we go. This is the slide I'm looking for. We did meet with their local school decision-making committee last week, and we heard from them and the principal about what some of their interests are. We also received from them some surveys that they had done and a few studies that they have done since they have become Spencer Center. And what we would pull from the things that we learned are some of the strengths bulleted there. We pulled some of the weaknesses that they shared, bulleted there, some opportunities. And I want to hone in on the opportunities for Spencer. They are very much interested in increasing their footprint as far as space for kids, as far as space for what would be greatly appropriate for, in particular, high school students. including their science labs, including a regulation gym for their student athletes. They highlight the fact that they have to right now turn students and families away from their school because of the space that they currently have. And they say as a community that they are ready, past ready for a shift and for change. And the threats that we gathered from what was shared with us is their concern for their students who leave them for other opportunities, in particular at grades 4 and 8. Next slide, please, Rob. We had a review of what we have with Riverview East Academy, especially in this budget crisis. We've had the opportunity to look at enrollment, to look at programming, to look at the number of teachers, the administration, faculty, and staff overall over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So some of the strengths that we pulled considering Riverview East Academy is that when this school was created, it was something that was created for the students of the East End at that time, pulling from both Linwood School and McKinley School. We created a K-12 environment at that time because the students, after they surpassed a particular grade, would not continue on for high school. Another strength is that they now have a career focus in health. And that is something the principal and those students are very, very proud of. The opportunity for Riverview East Academy is that that particular building holds 800 students. But some of the weaknesses include a total K-12 enrollment at this time of 482 students. 92 of those students live within the school boundaries. So some of the threats right now are enrollment and transportation. I didn't provide a map, a hot map of where the children are coming from, but they're coming from all over the district to Riverview East Academy. Next slide, please. So the recommendation that we have is that we would consider in the Riverview East building, relocating the K to 6th grade students to Mount Washington School. Mount Washington School has a capacity of 650 children. Their current enrollment is 287 students. This would allow us to relocate Riverview East 7th through 12th grade students to the 2nd floor for the 24-25 school year and relocate the 7th through 12th grade, or relocate the 7th to 12th grade students to their neighborhood school or the school of their choice that may be available at this time. The recommendation for Spencer Center for the 2024-2025 school year would be to relocate Spencer Center to the 1st floor of Riverview East Academy, and during fiscal year 26, they would then occupy the entire building. Next slide, please. Phase 1B is work around the Promise Center and the Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning. On the next slide, you'll see with the Promise Center, the average daily attendance is 201 students. The Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning currently has enrolled 47 students. The recommendation would be to relocate the Promise Center and Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning to the Spencer building. Next slide, please. The Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning building in Madisonville would then be vacated. And we propose that we repurpose that building to create the First Cincinnati Public School Middle School, and that Schroeder High School students in the 7th and 8th grade would be moved to that building. Next slide, Rob. That is the presentation for your consideration.
Well, I think we're going to have a discussion. Any questions, comments to get us started? Asking the interim superintendent for further explanations. Mr. Craig.
So again, thank you for putting together the presentation. I had several questions, and again, I've been pondering some of these things since it was posted, but I think one of my first concerns though is that we know that how many students are at Spencer now?
Spencer has about 383 students right now.
And are we expecting them to increase in 2025 or in the 25 school year or 26 fiscal year? Because I think,
So they won't be able to due to the current process right now, which means they had to be in the lottery
Mhm.
and they had to have that particular score to be admitted. So pretty much her population, Spencer's population is pretty much solidified for the upcoming school year. There may be a couple of exceptions for some reason I can't think of, but for the most part, it's pretty much solidified.
because my one concern is that we are essentially moving one school that's underpopulated out of a building and then moving another school that'll be underpopulated into the building to underpopulate that school. And so like that is a that's a concern of mine, is that if we're not growing that number up to somewhere closer to that 600-700 student range.
You mean for Spencer Center?
Yes.
I'm sorry. The goal would be then it can grow. Then we
Okay.
can begin to admit more students because we have more space available for those kids.
Okay.
The only reason the emphasis is not to grow for the 24-25 school year is because those 7 through 12 Riverview students have the option of remaining there
Okay.
for 1 year.
Beyond the 1 year, then so the other part to it to me is that if we had a conversation yet with parents of Riverview students, because I think part of the point that you made earlier with the fact that I think we all acknowledge that there's very few students, or I should say very few families who live in the Riverview area these days who are opting to use Riverview as a classroom option or as a schooling option. That does mean that some students are coming from spaces where going to Mount Washington may not be a convenient space for them. And so for this year, if they are expected to go to Mount Washington for the K through 6, are there conversations that have already happened or conversations that would be happening now because those parents made decisions based upon where their kids were and what they were hoping for or expecting?
So for example, at Riverview East Academy Kindergarten, there are 10 students in that neighborhood that are within their boundaries, 10.
Mhm.
100 and some, we can't run a school. As we work through this budget process, it's really challenging. To your question about talking to the parents, what I've done next, I'm trying to step this out step by step. We do have a proposal for Cohere to help us work through engaging not only the parents, the community, the faculty and staff as well. So there's a plan for that, at least to get that started. Should you tell me it's okay to continue to move in this direction?
And again, I think my concern is also that parents made decisions back when they elected to what school they wanted their child to go to, that now we are basically taking that decision and changing it. And I think it's a fair thing to some level. And I respect the fact, because I, more than anyone, say we need to make certain decisions on our buildings because of our fiscal, the fiscal responsibility says that we can't have a building that's 800 with 200 something students inside of it. Like it's just not realistic to manage that and maintain that. But I think that's true of a few of our schools that we are having these concerns with, of the underpopulation of students in those schools. And I think that trends to something that we'll probably hopefully talk with the city about, which is keep moving families out of certain communities and moving folks in who don't have families, who have families that are not sending their kids to our schools. But I am a little concerned just in that we're changing things in the 25 fiscal year that comes after parents would have made a decision, after some folks would have made certain levels of expectations and choices. With regard to sending their kids, whether it's through Spencer. I know we've heard some concerns with, again, moving locations means it is a different space. It may be less of a benefit to someone who loves their fact their kids down the street from them and now their kid is a little bit further away. But the same deal for Riverview, right?
Yeah.
And so
when we engage with Spencer, the two things, the Spencer LSDMC, the two things they wanted to do was to be able to have a facility where they could provide all of the amenities of being in a high school. And they wanted to be able to be in a place where they could grow and not turn families away.
And then the last question I have is just around transportation.
Mhm.
And like, do we have an idea of what effects moving students from Riverview would have on those transportation costs to Mount Washington, or if parents make choices to send their kids somewhere else, if we would be able to start to figure those numbers out as well?
So we've had conversations in terms of the feasibility of doing this. We don't have the actual cost yet because it's really contingent upon if seventh and eighth grade seventh through 12th grade, I'm sorry, students from Riverview choose to move to a different school or no. So we haven't had a chance to put that entire picture together. We think that over time, can't give you a number today, that there will be an impact, positive.
We go to, Dr. Moffett, and then we'll go to the Vice President.
So I just want to add on, because I had an opportunity to be on that call with Spencer and Superintendent Murphy. I was invited, and I want to share a couple of things that I heard. I was also a little hesitant in the beginning about the movement or the potential combination. But after speaking with the Spencer community, and there were quite a few people on there, I think almost 20, along with some of the Walnut Hills community members. I think the president was on. They were asked before anything, and nothing was really formally presented to them, but they were asked their two top priorities. Their two top priorities was a different facility and growth. To my understanding, prior to that meeting, they had turned away almost 100 students for this upcoming year. That is concerning, that they could not have that many students that qualified to be enrolled, but had to be turned away because of space. So facilities, I understood. I also thought that, having been on the ad hoc last year and done all this work, well, let's just have them switch with the little Frederick Douglass, because they're bigger and that they could immediately have space. And they identified that their other concern is that they didn't have adequate lab space for the type of curriculum that their students were already engaging but couldn't fully engage in because they didn't have the facilities, again, back to facilities, and the capacity. So they were having to make some exceptions regarding academics. Again, the board decided, and they reminded us that the board decided that they would exist in the way that they existed. And so they were expecting the district to provide them with the adequate academics to support their curriculum. I also will say, nothing was anticipated. The only movement that I heard was for Spencer to relocate, not for Riverview to relocate this year. So those families would not be moving. They would be sharing the space for the upcoming 24-25 year. The potential movement would be for the next year after the dust settles and there's more identification around where those students are coming from. So I think, Superintendent Murphy, you can definitely take us back to the specifics, but it says for the fiscal year on slide 6, Rob, if you could go there, Spencer Center would relocate for this upcoming year. But I think for the 25 or 26 year for Riverview, and I was understanding it to be for I give my years, but not this year, but for the next year.
For 7th through 12th grade.
Okay.
We're talking immediately for K to 6
And
in
that
the
would,
Mount Washington space.
and that would be an impact of the less than 100 students.
It's about 124 children. I have the number.
And so I wrote this down, that 19% live within that boundary out of that entire capacity. 19% live within the boundary. And then Mount Washington is utilizing 44% of their building capacity, which again is a little concerning. I do have a question for you though. Is it possible, to Board Member Craig's point, to keep those two entire schools in the building for this next year, just Spencer and Riverview, and not move the grade that you're thinking?
I do not think it's possible K-12. You said maybe? No? I don't think it would be comfortable K-12.
Okay. So I just wanted to add that piece, that and to engagement, absolutely, we are big on engagement. There just had to be a foundation first of seeing if this is even feasible. And Superintendent Murphy to present it to the Spencer community that in the event that the board has interest, there would be robust engagement to everyone there. So that hasn't been lost. I wanted to ensure that it has not been lost. But I wanted just to share that the potential proposal was received very well from the Spencer community. Not given all of the information to get in front of the board, but it was received well because
They
they're
cried.
Yeah,
They cried, literally.
tears of joy, not
Tears of joy,
not
tears of
anger.
joy.
Vice President Weinberg?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, and Board Member Moffett already talked a little bit about it. It was the community engagement piece because I know that they came forward today and just wanting to voice that you're just bringing this recommendation to us just to kind of, again, start the groundwork. And then obviously, we don't want to forget about our community members and making sure that they have a voice and that they're being heard as we're moving forward. I do want to thank you for stepping outside of the box and coming up with this. When you're looking at some of the slides and showcasing some of the information about the strengths and the weaknesses of the particular schools and kind of what they're looking for, I am just curious. I know you didn't have a number or you didn't have the specific neighborhoods, but for Riverview East, with the 482 total students, but only 92 of them are living, what are the other neighborhoods? Do you happen to know the range? Is it 10 other different neighborhoods, 15? And then my question would be, how were they able to even select that school to then come to?
It's a great question, how they're able to select the school to come to, and I don't know the answer to that. But Board Member Weinberg, they are coming from almost every neighborhood you can imagine.
Okay,
All. Jeremy says all.
interesting. Okay, so this is definitely an opportunity to just really, not only, I wouldn't say clean up house, but just really checking to make sure that we are, doing what we're supposed to be doing and having families where they're supposed to be at as well.
Member Matt?
Yes, thank you for this information. So we did hear a lot of information about how the Spencer community, at least the LSDMCs responded. I am interested in knowing how did the Riverview East, LSDMCs respond when receiving this information, because yes, changes need to be made, but I am concerned about potential displacement of our students.
I would like to refer to it as a better opportunity for students as opposed to displacement, respectfully. I didn't want to go too far without the board saying it's okay to continue. So have I, other than the principal, engaged with Riverview? Not yet. Not yet, but I do know that that has to be done.
Okay, so just for clarification, there was engagement with Spencer's LSDMC.
Yes.
But there has only been engagement with the principal at Riverview.
That's correct. And with Spencer, they don't know, they weren't shared the specific idea. Just, it was really a listening opportunity.
Okay. And so ultimately you're waiting for feedback from us, in terms of how to move forward with further engagement on this.
Not how to move forward with further engagement, but just broadly, you may move forward with these ideas. I do understand there has to be engagement. I do have a plan for engagement.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Craig, then I'll take the opportunity.
I'll jump in too, President Bolden, whenever Mr. Craig's done.
Okay, let's do Mr. Craig and then let's do that voice from on high, Mr. Lindy.
The godlike voice there without the head. I think engagement's one aspect of it. And I think that's actually an important part to it, but I am still a little bit concerned because if we have students who are coming from all over the city, who are going to Riverview, and then we're moving them over to Mount Washington, you could have a student coming from Bond Hill going to Mount Washington, doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. And at the same time, like we're kind of perpetuating the same problem that already existed at Riverview to another building. Now, I also recognize and appreciate the fact that, you know, Mount Washington needs students as well. And I've said this for like the last year, that we had to come up with something else to make Mount Washington more feasible, because the reality was those parents who chose to put their kids in other places, in other spaces, did so because of the fact that they wanted to be closer to them. There's not, we don't have spaces for students to grow in that space, that part of town, in the same way we do in the center of the city. So there is somewhat of a more pressing issue to figure out those spaces for the east side of the town in some ways, and then the west side is finding out more capacity for students because of the number of students we have in some of the schools that are over capacity. But again, my concern is just if we are perpetuating students who are going to a school that's not near them, or not in their vicinity, or not in a space where they, in theory, should have been going in the first place, and we're perpetuating that. And then the other thing is, for the students who go 7th through 12th who stay the additional year, you know, for a student who's like in the 11th grade or 10th grade who stays for the 11th grade, and now you're going to a different school for 12th grade, is there a possibility of phasing out of some approach, or either giving them some level of priority to stay if they're close to graduation? And I think that's, for me, it's about constant moving with a student also affects their grades and how they perform and their collection of friends and all the other factors that we talk about being about the whole child. It would make sense to me that even if we're phasing them into another aspect or a portion of Spencer from that 10th, 11th, 12th group, that at least could be a way to keep those students and keep the numbers in the school, but also be thinking about removing some of the volatility of them having to change a school or having to figure out where their next school is. And so that's just another possibility to add into that thought process.
I appreciate that suggestion very much so. A phase out is a possibility. I just want to emphasize, as you are considering this, it's an amazing opportunity right now, but I think in 2 weeks, the opportunity won't be there because of the amount of work that will need to be done. I also think that this plan addresses several things that this board has been talking about for a long time. And I'm happy to, my team and I are happy to get started on this work if you allow it.
Mr. Lindy?
Thanks, President Bolton. Is my sound coming through okay?
It sure is.
Great. I think my perspective is that this is too fast. The kids have already left for the summer. The teachers have already left for the summer. And I'm hearing this right. The proposal is for this to be a change that goes into effect this coming fall.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think from my perspective, that's too fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindy. Any, Dr. Moffitt?
So I just want to add that the Spencer community was asked how fast could they go if things were to be considered for for this upcoming year, and they had no problem with it. So I just want to take that into consideration, because I asked some of the same questions and concerns with regard to the speed, and that particular community shared that they would be on board to assisting the district with regard to engagement of their students and their 3 graduating class alumni, and also their families, and have invited the board members to their, I think was it June 19th? They've got a PTO meeting, and have invited and said that that's also my birthday, and have invited us to come and work with their parents and their team over the summer to help in any capacity. So I'm saying that because the concern that we have may not be the concerns that the community is sharing, but just to ensure, I heard that from them, that they were willing to have that. So just to, put it in the perspective that making sure that it's not our issue, is not their issue.
Member Mapp?
Thank you, Board Member Moffitt. I think that's really important to know, and I received that that feedback from the Spencer community. But what I'm also hearing is that I think we're taking into consideration one, perspective in terms of attending to maybe the needs of just one school and not fully honoring the other school that we're considering here in terms of making changes. So I would like to hear from both perspectives to ensure that we're as much as possible trying to honor the needs for both schools and students and families, as well as teachers and administrators.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm gonna, if I can, I'll start with several things. I am completely convinced that the Spencer community needs to move into a facility that allows them to build their high school program. And they've asked for that for 5 years. I think they've been hoping that we would build them an addition, or we would find them someplace in the middle of the city that we could do that. Well, that is not going to happen. We do not have money to buy or build an addition for Spencer. We have, for the last few years, been turning people away from Spencer. The kinds of students, families that want to go to Spencer. I can remember when we created Spencer, in part, it was to compete in part with Walnut from a standpoint of kids that probably could do Walnut, but it wasn't the right fit for them. That was part of the concept. Spencer, and this is why it's so beautiful that it's named for Mr. and Mrs. Spencer. It was an outgrowth of something coming with board student achievement committee, because we knew and we saw that those children, young people of color, were getting under-identified for the gifted program. And we had a wonderful person, it was Susan Bunty, who said, well, let me see what we can do about that. And Susan went and she found different testing material, and almost overnight, there were many, 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 many young people that had a place that they could go and that they were being identified. And then we put them in a basically wonderful mid-century building. I love the building, but too small for growth. Spencer, and I know this is the one thing the Spencer people don't want, is that it could be as big as it could be. It is going to be very big if it has the facilities that are needed. But here's the problem for me, and I think this is what's kind of being said, is that I'm not worried about putting Spencer there. I'm worried about us engaging the Riverview people. And I know that we've spoken to the principal and what have you, which is where the superintendent should start. Having lived through the facilities master plan, I'm the only person still on this board that lived through this. This is really no big shakes, frankly. This kind of stuff happened all the time. And it's, you don't want it to happen, but here's the reality. We only have a limited number of facilities. We're not going to build a new high school for Spencer. And Spencer needs to grow to serve our students. What we have to do is what we would do in facilities master plan, it seems to me, and I'm still not happy about Riverview yet, but we have to figure our grandfathering schedule. That's how you do change, is that you do the engagement and then you figure out how long do you want the grandfathering to last. For example, Mr. Craig's suggestion, and as a retired high school teacher, if somebody's in 9th grade at Riverview, if they could stay not 1 year or 2 years, but they could finish their high school career, that's a whole different ballgame to be able to say that. Interestingly enough, it was the previous superintendent that kind of dissed the ad hoc committee because to their credit, they came up with the fact that we needed to repurpose Riverview, that it was a facilities that was being underused and undervalued and not really in the inventory. For me, I have difficulty, you know me, I like the idea that we have a K-12 on the east side and a K-12 on the west side. That's just the way I like to see things. But I can forget that. Because what you're saying is that you're gonna try to have Spencer grow, have Riverview repurpose over time through grandfathering and whatever. And if there are all those kids coming from every place else, I just want you all to figure out that transportation cost. Because we're not interested in making 7th and 8th graders go on Metro. We haven't been that excited about trying to make them walk longer or farther or reduce all these other options on transportation. The way you're going to reduce transportation in this district is to stop this kind of craziness. These people are probably passing 6 or 7 schools to get to this school. We can't afford it. We were told 2 years ago, and I think this is still the number, just having, and this is 2 other schools, having the kids that live in the Winton Terrace area, Winton Hills area, go to Pleasant Hill was costing us $300,000 a year. They literally walk past their own school, are forced to go to another school, and it was $300,000 a year just to do that. So now you've got all these other kids coming in from wherever. So I think grandfathering starts to work it out. But and maybe I missed it, and I don't mean to make this so long, but you were also saying that we are trying to do, it's not just a bilateral thing. You have a multilateral thing happening here.
Yes.
Because you are now taking the 7th and 8th graders out of Schroeder, moving them to the now would be vacant building,
Yes.
which then takes care of the Schroeder issues
Yeah.
and starts to build the middle school piece, but more particularly the clientele that very frankly, I don't know that we've been doing very well by, and we have an outstanding administrator at the Promise Center and at Lighthouse, but those 2 schools are going to be impacted. So it's a multilateral, I won't say chess game because there's a purpose to chess to take over something, but it's a puzzle. And you're talking about at least 5 or 6 pieces, not just 2, but I would be interested in seeing what you're able to do with further engagement at Riverview and people thinking about it. I know it's a treasurer's thing about grandfathering. In order to save money, how long do you grandfather? Or if you make change, how do you do that? So I'm interested in the multilateral part of it. If we don't start doing this somewhere along the line, we're not going to. We're going to lose another year. That's my thoughts.
President Bolden,
Yes, sir. Mr. Lindy.
I'm very happy to get in line. I just can't see who's raising my hand all the time.
You're good. Go for it.
Well, I think my question might be for Interim Superintendent Murphy. And I think I caught part of this before, but not the whole piece. Are both the principals of Spencer and Riverview supportive of this?
Yes. And yes.
Okay. I mean, I think that does a lot of work for me because they're the ones who at the end of the day are going to have to deal with most of this. And my major concern was the timing. I don't really disagree with the financial arguments that people are making. And I fully support taking a really clear-eyed look at how we need to think about enrollment in schools, but both from an academic outcomes perspective and from a financial perspective. So no pushback from me on that whatsoever. My real concern was just this felt like it was going to be a surprise to people. And if it's the fact that both school principals think this is the right thing to do, I mean, I don't think you get any pushback from me in that case.
We've talked to each principal. The only principal I didn't have a face-to-face with was Mount Washington principal, but I did speak with her as well, and she would be on board 100%. And I just want to ask the board, I respect the thought around too fast, but if you just think about the kid it will impact, and less of what is convenient or inconvenient for the adults. in this situation, when I think about the location of the Promise Center, I wouldn't want my child there. Wouldn't want
Thank
it.
you.
So it's a big picture in terms of all of the impact that you could make by letting us move forward with this.
I appreciate that, on the Promise Center piece, and for the audience, it's located at the Jacobs Center, is that where it is? The other piece, I feel, I can remember speaking with Dick Adams and Mr. Kent Friel, people that helped invent the Lighthouse School. And when they were having issues and we said we would take this on, I feel obligated in part to make sure that we're also addressing the needs of those students. And I also know that the law requires us to have a functioning kind of Promise Center. And these are the kids, young people that need the most of our attention. But I would really hope that we would have you have more data than you already have. Appreciate you having the nerve to bring this. And have we talked to the operations guy about how this works? Where's Mr. Burkhardt on all of this? Mr. Transportation, Mr. Facilities, Mr. Logistics. He's nodding his head for those of you listening on radio. Well, Mr. Craig.
So I wanted to touch a little bit on the part that you hit on the end there with regards to the other buildings that are also affected by the plan here. And I think, again, for me, there is certainly a lot of benefits that come for all of these different spaces to be moved. I know we've talked about with regard to the Promise Center as well as the Odell Ellen Center for learning that it's a need for, what was that noise? But it was a need for.
Remember to drink water.
A need for coordinating and giving a space that would be adequate for them and utilizing those spaces. And I think that's an important part to it. And so there are aspects of this, yes, absolutely, I think are great moves. My worry and concern is that when we previously talked about getting rid of Riverview, we had this place filled up with Riverview people. When we've talked about doing stuff with Woodford, we had people fill the space with Woodford. We talked about doing stuff with South Avondale and Rockdale. We filled this facility with folks for those. With Douglas and Evanston, we filled the space with those folks and filled the online with those folks. And they were very clear kind of where their thoughts were. And so my worry is always that I think, yes, for Spencer, they've been asking for a bigger building since they got a building. It ain't a new conversation they've been having. They've been having that conversation. Before I got on the board, people were trying to convince me that Spencer needed to have, a walnut-sized facility where they could have 2,000 students that day, right? Like, that's not a new conversation point. They're gonna love having a bigger space. There are students, though, who their parents picked Riverview for a reason, that are now being told they don't have a choice where they're going. And my only issue, again, is that if you're having a conversation with them about that, that's one thing. If you're just going in and saying, we're moving you all here, this is where you're at. We're not giving you an opportunity to go apply for anywhere else. We're not giving you an opportunity to consider any other schools. This is where you're now at. We perpetuate the same problems that we have at Riverview, which is that we will have a student, instead of going to Riverview, going to Mount Washington now, who probably should be at South Avondale, she at Rockdale, who probably should be at some of these other schools where we need students. To the other point to that is, I do think if whatever decision we as a board make, as with regard to the recommendation, we do need to give you an answer. I think that's 100% we do. Because whatever these decisions are, they take effort to get there, right? And if we're gonna talk about doing budget savings and all these other things, yes, absolutely. Some of these consolidations and some of these decisions to move folks into the right spaces need to be made. But I do want us to be careful that we're not just saying all the great things for the schools, for the students who get the benefit, and making it seem as though we did not hear the students who did not. For the student who had met all their friends and has had friends since kindergarten and now won't see that friend anymore, that's an effect. For the student who's an 8th grader or 9th grader who says, I want to be with my friends that I've gone to school with for the last 5 years. I mean, they were remarking at the Riverview graduation, folks who had made it from the start to the end. That was a big thing for them, of those folks who were. So it's not a little thing to say, you get one more year and then you're out. And I think that it just sounds very much like that's how we're kind of talking about it, and that it's benefiting all these other great folks, so we should jump on that. And I think that feels very some kind of way about the folks, because that's what we were doing when we said we wanted to close the building, when we said we wanted to consolidate on other things. That's what it felt like to folks, is that we were saying, yeah, but it's gonna be great, and you should just accept it. As opposed to, we understand this is gonna be hard for some folks, and we gotta figure out a way, that's our responsibility, to figure out that transition. And so that's the only thing I would say with the plan, is I really would like to see a better transition for those students who are going to be moved, because it's not necessarily going to be a benefit to all of those students. And I think we need to recognize that and appreciate that.
So, before we move on, it's what I'm hearing is a particular interest in, is it greater engagement or, and a more detailed transition for the Riverview students? I'm hearing some consensus about Spencer. I'm hearing some consensus actually about Promise Center and Lighthouse and the need to service those, but trying to just, that's, right now, that's what the chair's hearing. I'll go to Vice President, then I'll go to Member Moffitt.
Yes, thank you, President Bolton. And Superintendent Murphy, I just think as we're making these decisions, or as we're discussing, I just would hope, obviously, that we're very transparent with our families, and we're very transparent with the staff and with students. So as we're talking about next steps and moving forward, I don't feel as if we're just making this decision and just saying, hey, you just have to deal with it. I do think that we will plan to engage. We will plan to give parents that heads up. You're not going to make everyone happy at the end of the day. We're going to have to make these tough decisions, but I think it's about the delivery and how you involve them as we're making these decisions. So I would be interested to hear, in terms of President Bolton, you were saying that we kind of have some movement for what we would like to do in terms of gathering more information, getting that engagement, and just seeing what we can do for our next steps.
Thank you, Vice President. Member Moffitt?
So I do agree with Board Member Craig wholeheartedly. And I'm really a big engagement person. Having heard the concerns of the Walnut Hills community and the Spencer community, and then sat through 18 months of ad hoc, I think it's super important to engage. I also would remind this board that we had a recommendation January 27th to close a school for the next year. And that would be completely devastating to our kids. There was no engagement plan to those families. The recommendation from administration was to close Riverview and South Avondale with absolutely no consideration regarding engagement, regarding the community perspective, regarding influence, absolutely none. There was no plan. There was just a recommendation to save $4 million by closing 2 schools for the next year, with the consequence that when you do close schools, the state mandates that those school buildings have to be closed. So I think that we have made it very, very clear to Superintendent Murphy that engagement is not only a high priority, it is necessary for the board to, in good conscience, have the best benefit for our students. I completely agree with you that there are students that are going to be impacted, but the 100 students, potentially students that were going to be impacted, we were talking about hundreds in January. And so I think there is still time. I think we can definitely do our due diligence. We have heard some very significant concerns around Riverview all last academic year, around safety and security there, that I think the superintendent has a plan for. with regard to Spencer and their growth and facilities. I believe there is a plan. The biggest hurdle is to get the buy-in from the community and the school community and the neighborhood community. And it sounds as if we can do that. So I'm willing to make myself available to, as a board member, attend these meetings with you, to stand there, and I would invite my colleagues to do the same. If engagement is their high priority, I think we can help you sell this to the neighborhoods and the community because we will be standing behind our commitment. So that's the only thing I want to add.
Other comments, questions? Well, I'll just take a point of personal privilege about Riverview. I think there were about 5 years in a row or more that I would make sure that I would attend their great class day that they would have, and the kids would walk from Riverview School to where the Junior Women's Club meets there on the corner. And the parents would be there and greet them as they would come in the door. I do still believe in K-12 buildings. But we have a finite number of buildings and we have a multitude of needs and a great diverse range of kids that need servicing. So I am hearing from the board that we might be encouraging the superintendent and ask the superintendent for a little bit more detail of these student populations, places or what have you, and deep engagement as can be with the Riverview community. Have we spoken with meaning the royal we, you, have we spoken with the Schroeder principal about the possibility of not having the 7th and 8th graders?
Absolutely. Yes, she's on board.
I just want nobody else.
Stop clapping out there. We know you guys are the 7th and 8th graders. They're challenging.
But here's, I'm going to say my personal issue with that. I think that's great. That's good. But again, I'm the one that kept saying again and again and again, we are not returning to junior highs. They were failing when we stopped them some years, 20 years ago or whatever. So, but at least as a way to build a middle school over time and reduce the stress on our high schools, I think that's a great idea to have the 7th and 8th grade. And if you could find other opportunities to do that for some of the other high schools, I'm sure they would embrace it as well. Nothing personal about 7th and 8th graders, but God love them. Is that the direction we're giving the superintendent regarding Riverview? Mr. Craig?
I mean, my personal opinion is still that I don't know what transition we have for those students who are in K through 6. And again, I keep raising this because I think it's legit question to ask is if we're perpetuating the same things for those kids for next year and the years before future, we're just really moving them a location. For the kids who are in 7 to 12, having a transition plan. I think engagements, we definitely need to do engagement. I think it's always important. But the reality is that if we go in an engagement and we don't have a transition plan whatsoever, other than your kid has 1 year and they're out, they're not gonna like that any more than they liked the idea of the school closing this year. So, I mean, I think it's great to blame the last administration on a bunch of stuff they're proposed, but the reality is this needs to be answered to a person to not say, this is a great plan, and hey, look at how all these other folks love it so much. Because that's, to me, is not engagement. That's just silly. To walk over to a person and say, you're putting them out of the place they've been in for the last 6 years, but everybody else is going to be happy because they're coming in, sounds silly to me. That someone would support that. I get it. Folks are not going to like it. And that just may be the reality. So if we're not, I would say we need to have a transition plan in addition to having an engagement plan.
Excellent.
So that when we go to do engagement, there is something to tell them of substance because their kids are being moved this year for some of them.
Some of them.
For some of the kids, they're being pushed up to 1 floor of a building. Like it's again, it's not just as simple as saying this happens and then we make it happen at this point.
Superintendent, did you get that message?
I've taken notes, yes, thank you. But I do want to share that, I appreciate the comment. I think I had it on the 7 to 12 slide, but not really on K-6. What we could do for K-6, rather easily is work with their families. If Mount Washington is not the answer for them, one of our other elementary schools, we would definitely work with them, this year, if that would be their pleasure.
This kind of reminds me of swing space too, where when this particular building was under construction or what have you, people were given kind of first dibs, that if you couldn't do the swing space, you couldn't do your regular school, you couldn't do the swing space because of its location or what have you. There was tremendous individual, I mean, that was what public affairs was doing, was phone after phone after phone. And I mean, that's what it does take, is the individualized effort. And to Craig's point, to Brandon's point, it really is sharing a transition plan instead of, so you're gonna do this and like it. So I trust the superintendent's people to come up with that kind of transition plan. Next presentation. Well, I hope it's just as exciting as this. Oh my God.
It'll be a lot
It's
shorter.
even better. It's the money. Oh, Lord. Oh, Madam Treasurer, are you presenting this?
I
or,
am. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Treasurer.
I just took a cough drop in my mouth. Okay, so thank you for starting here. So just to remind everybody, so tonight's purpose is just to give everybody, board, public, an update of where we are on the budget. Our budget efforts we've had, like Ms. Seller said earlier, just some really great collaboration, sacrifice, ideas, you know, stepping on each other's toes, but doing it in a kind way. And it's just been a really great experience to this point, and we're going to continue to meet to get this done. So it's just starting off with a reminder that our budget target is 627. So we started with the November forecast at 606, and we're talking millions of dollars. We revised it in February because of the reappraisal process. And then in May, when we received the new TIF payments, we realized that that went up as well. So 627 is our target next time. So you've seen this document before, but what I did is I went and updated up through June 13. Last week I went in and said, okay, well, we thought the budget target, the gap was on May 29th was 13.66. Some of the things activities that we estimated didn't necessarily come to fruition. So our target then changed to 14.1. There was a lot of moving parts. Okay, so then the elementary staffing review team met that during the weeks between June 3rd and June 13th. And they were able to review staffing based on updated student enrollment projection data. And were able to save 2.4 million in vacant positions, redistributing bodies. And then if you recall me explaining the double budgeting that we have to do with students who are in IEPs and are required to have a one-on-one para with them, we have to budget for the position because it's required by federal law. But if there's a vacancy or an absence, we also have to pay for a contractor to go in and fill that vacancy because we can't just, the student can't just not have that service. So what happens is their budget gets underspent every year because we're budgeting for an employee and we're budgeting for a contractor just in case we have an absence or a vacancy. So we're spending one or the other, but not both. And so we've estimated over a 3-year trend, $1.5 million won't get spent. So we'll put a negative contingency in for that. So that gets us down to a $10.2 million budget gap as of June 3rd when I restated everything. Next slide. So last week, the budget task force met, a very small group of us because there's a lot of people that were traveling. And then we met again today from noon to 2. And so next slide, we're going to start talking about So the group that met on June 13th came up with a list of 10 items that we needed to consider or calculate or investigate or report on. And so there's a lot of activity. We got through a lot of it. First 7 items, I think, no, 6 items we got through. We skipped the first one because we had some trouble with that report. But so we got through some of it today. We came up with some savings. We're meeting again on Friday to finish off the list and figure out what to do next. So I'll just go through them real quickly. So we're re-looking at all the vacancies that are out there. We are looking at budgets that increased from pre-COVID. So I updated a historical document you remember seeing last year. I've updated that so we can see where budgets climbed or declined. We've looked at a list of retiree hires to see if there was any opportunities there. I'm sorry?
What does that mean?
So we have employees that are retired, but then we've rehired them. And so there was a question from one of the members of the budget task force, was there any opportunity to save money in those positions? And so the answer is no, because most collective bargaining agreements require a retiree hire to leave they come back at the lowest salary scale. So you're actually paying for the same service for a lower dollar.
Right.
And so it really doesn't save you any money, but it was a question that was asked and all ideas are being discussed. And so we put that data together.
Trustee Wagner,
Hold on.
does that retired piece include early retirements?
No.
Or, okay.
So and we also reviewed early retirements because I get asked about that almost every year. Early retirement incentives only work when you don't have to buy the employee's time in order to get them to the retirement service years. So it almost never saves money because the most districts, and I've talked to my colleagues about this, don't have a big group of people that are high salaried and can retire. Most people retire when they can. So you don't have, we have a few like teachers, but they're positions that are required. You can't cut them. Right. So it doesn't always, it sounds like a great idea, but it doesn't work well. There was a request to reconsider the possibility of redistributing the resources of the response team. And that's being currently worked on. No recommendation yet. There was a group of people that went and looked at the clerical staffing based on these new projected data. And they were able to come up with a recommendation and redistribute some of the resources. I was asked in the last meeting about the facility contracts and whether we're using local vendors. And so we created a report that showed all facility contracts that were issued for fiscal year 24, and I've shared those with the two union leads that had asked for the information, along with Mr. Burkhart, so they could review it and use that data to make recommendations. There was an idea to reconsider or repurpose the employee care center, but what we've come to realize is that most of the people in the employee care center are actually, they're in their department's budgets. They just go down there and serve time. So there's only 2 positions that don't belong to one of those serving departments. But they provide a really great service because what we're doing is serving the employee in one spot instead of having them roam all over the building and not get good care. We had some great feedback from some of our union leads about the services their members are getting in the employee care center. Somebody suggested going back and looking at the nursing contract to see if we could carve out another $1 million. Somebody suggested looking at the treasurer's organization that we might be too manager heavy. So we're going to go through my org chart. That was one of the things we didn't get to today. And then there was an idea about saying, can we just ask the schools if they could just give back some money? And so I have this analysis. We didn't get a chance to go over it today, but it kind of steps through like the big schools. If they gave this much back, what would the impact be to their budget? So we'll keep going through that. Next slide. So this is what we were able to do today, or able to capture today. There was a recommendation to remove the Cognia contract that I believe, we're gonna skip a year of doing, we don't have any schools that need accreditation. So that saves us 68,000. The marketing comms team, was able to get through their contracts and made a recommendation. I don't know how many that represents, but they were able to save $213,000. There was a request to consider insource and outsource in the Department of Student Services and anybody that has a yellow badge. So that's how we're in determining the possibility of insourcing and whether it will save us money, as we did with the transportation and some of the technology positions last year. The clerical redistribution had, we were able to save 14 positions that gained us $872,000. There was a request to review the tech help desk function to see if maybe there could be some structuring there that could save money. I have a vacant position in the treasurer's department, that we agreed to postpone filling early or cutting for the year. And then transportation, had one, but then I got a message during the meeting that they're gonna add a second one. So that hasn't been captured as data yet. Keep going. So there was a request to consider eliminating Edgenuity for a product called Canvas, and I don't know very much about these products, but there appear to be some duplicative of service. And so I think Dr. Smith is looking into that. And then our unions very graciously agreed to give up 50% of their professional development funds for the year. And to do it, they recommended to do an MOU. So this is the calculation of everybody's 50%. So it was another $600,000 in savings. So this is where it leaves us. So we started at 10.2. We removed Cognia. We had an add back to because of the leave pool calculation there. I guess there was an error in the original budget calculation. There was a group that looked at the under 200 contracts that are recommending a reduction of $1 million, but those have not been shared with department heads or anybody, so we don't know how realistic it is yet. So that still has to be adopted. You have the marketing comms contract, the clerical vacancies I just talked about, transportation. Next slide. The professional development funds, and that gets us down to 9.1 million. The PDF that's saved on the boards, on the board docs says 9.2 million, but when I was talking to Chris, I realized I made a mathematical, I did a minus plus instead of minus. So it's 9.1 million gap as of today. We still have work to do, but that's still a pretty big gap. So next slide. So we're meeting on Friday from 12:30 to 2:30. We have to finish our to-do list, review the vacancies, nursing contract, treasurer's organization, and possible school givebacks, and any other ideas that are coming to the table. I gave a lot of data today to review. They were asking some really great questions, but I encourage them to keep looking at the data to make more recommendations on the historical budgets and ideas for further reduction. Next slide. So unfortunately, we are going to have to do a temporary appropriation on Monday night so that I can file with the Hamilton County Budget Commission on time. And that will be presented. We'll give you an update on Monday before you do your vote. But we'll have to continue this practice. I doubt between now and Friday, we're going to find $9 million without a major shift in how we do business.
Vice President Weinberg?
Yes, so thank you so much for this information. I know that I asked a couple meetings ago regarding contracts that are over 200,000. Were you able to kind of comb back through that and kind of revisit and see if there was anything that may be able to be reconsidered?
So the facilities group are looking at the facilities ones. No, I need to add that back to our list to go back. Some of them have been presented, some of the changes, the really big ones. And the feedback we received is don't bring those ideas back to the table to the board. So we can continue to relook it and come back and make some.
Yeah, I would recommend relooking back at those because when you're thinking of, your big ticket items, so you have on this list, obviously the under 200,000, but if you're looking at something above 200,000, I think that will, aid in getting you to your 9 million. I have a question about the nursing contract. I know that that was brought to the board before and we voted on that. And so can you just elaborate a little bit on what you're possibly maybe thinking or considering?
So the conversation started with the historical budgets. Superintendent Murphy wanted to know, well, who grew? We need to get back to pre-COVID time, right? So we were looking at the budgets, the pre-COVID year to what was being recommended for 25. And my response was, well, if you go back to pre-COVID, then you got to take the nurses back down to 1.7 because that's what they were pre-COVID. Right now they're at 5.5. I've lost track now exactly what it is. But so that was just one example that popped in my head because the nurse contract is the same contract I've been using for 4 years as part of the Cliff conversation, if you recall, that saying we can't sustain this level of nursing. And so that's where that's how that conversation came up. And somebody said, well, can we at least get another million out? And so that's what they're looking for.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks. Questions?
I cut you off.
Dr. Moffett?
So thank you for offering that explanation regarding nurses, because immediately in my head was like, didn't we already talk about this? No, and this felt familiar. So if there is a possibility to go back to pre-COVID, because I understand your explanation now, which makes sense, I would want to see a plan, like what was the pre-COVID plan for nurses? I don't know what that was. So if you could kind of extrapolate that a little bit, if you're going to cut $1 million, what does that look like? And then for me, if you're going to cut $1 million, what does that look like? And who of the providers, I think there's 3, the city and then 2 more, who is not getting, where's the $1 million coming from? So that's what I would be interested in finding out, what type of supplemental services would be offered to cover that cut. And then school givebacks, where is that coming from? Because that sounds to me like that's that's kids, and that's again an immediate no. But for me, I can't speak for everybody else. So what are you talking about there?
So all ideas that are generated in the budget task force are anonymous.
Okay.
So somebody had the idea, and so we're just looking at it as an option.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a recommendation yet, because we haven't actually reviewed the data yet. But what we're trying to protect thinking outside the box, and so that people aren't getting upset with their union leaders by thinking outside the box. They're being very helpful and very creative. And so I'm becoming the communicator of all in an anonymous way.
I understand.
Okay.
So having said that, can you take that back to the group that I would be interested to see where what the plan is for supplementing the potential cuts to school. So again, it's the same thing for me. If you're going to cut from the schools, can they use title money to, I hate to keep throwing title money, but there's all kinds of title money. So can they use title money to supplement or supplant? You can't supplant, so supplement what your potential cuts are. That would be a question that I would be very interested in. And then lastly, I am very interested in any potential contracts over $200,000 because I believe, just cursory view, that there are contracts that we have been in for, maybe this is year 2 of 3, or that maybe we could get big ticket items for. So I'm very interested in seeing what.
Well, even if we're in a multi-year cycle, we can exit out of it. Well, there's always an exit clause in a contract, especially for financial purposes and when we have to do something different. So we will go back and look at the over 200s, putting aside electricity, and our the utilities and debt and stuff like that. So we will do that. I'll bring back, I'll take it to the group on Friday and we'll get a review process going, and I'll give you an update on Monday, but I don't know that we can get through all that on Monday.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Craig?
So I want to start by saying that this is a lot of hard work that you all are doing in these discussions, which goes to show that it is not simple when everything's not on the table. It's not simple to cut 9 million out. It's just the reality.
Right.
And then you're gonna have to make some cuts that are hard. You're gonna have to look at things, and everybody's got to put some skin in the game to get there. And I appreciate, the work that the union members have been doing it with you all and the work that the leadership team is doing. It's just also the reality that at some point or some time, we're gonna have to start putting stuff back on the table that are not on the table still. Because you're not gonna get down $9 million by going back and only reviewing part of what we reviewed. And last time I checked, you've never gotten a single time where schools asked for less money than they were budgeted for when it came time to do their budget. So, or they were scheduled for when it came time to do their budget. So this reality is that everybody wants to do what they're doing. Everybody wants to keep doing what we're doing for kids, and everybody wants to be as generous as we can. And so I applaud the hard work you all are doing. I think it's also why we've already talked, Treasurer Wagner and I, but about getting ahead of it for next year, because I don't think the choices get any easier when we slim down so much as we're doing now. And if we're truly going to find success next year to get our budget done on time, it just means we have to be moving ahead of the game and really thinking about those things. But the one thing I did want to ask about that I know we don't really have in our budget, but or have per se in our budget, but with regard to kind of maintenance repairs on buildings and that kind of stuff that we've typically budgeted for things like that, or even if we're doing some work on a facility that needs to be kind of maintained or something like that, or the emergency situations like when someone decides to drive drunk into one of our school buildings middle of the night, right? Like these things that happen that we've been able to use other resources sometimes for, or been able to kind of like, how are we also safeguarding against those emergency situations?
So, one thing the district's required to do every year in the budget is to transfer $3.2 million from the general fund into a building maintenance fund. They use that for those kinds of repairs. The facilities department also has a facility budget in the general fund to do day-to-day operations, but that's getting pretty slim and trim. And so there's a lot of stress in that area in terms of their ability to stay on top of those kinds of repairs. I don't want to put words in. Am I speaking correctly? Okay. But we do have insurance that helps cover during some of that other stuff. But when an emergency happens, if we can't address it, then we'll have to find things to cut out of the budget or increase appropriations or something. But we have some contingencies that are set aside for those kinds of things, but this budget is getting really lean. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Other questions, comments?
President Bolden.
Yes, I was waiting. That voice above. Go ahead, sir.
No, I mean, I just, to the treasurer, I want to express my gratitude for you and everybody who's been working on this very difficult progress. I think I'm a little surprised that in the last couple of weeks, we still have at least $9 million more to go. Do you see any way of closing that gap without some kind of reduction in force?
It could be accomplished if we made some different decisions about the over 200,000 or some of the things that we may have turned down earlier in the process. That may be a little bit more palpable if we're looking at, well, am I cutting employees or am I cutting services? So it can be done. It's going to be painful for everybody. So it can be done, or a combination thereof.
Okay. I'm still gathering some thoughts and may have some in the future, but I appreciate your response and I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
But the possibility of cutting personnel has to remain on the table if you're going to make the commitment to close the gap. Can you talk to me a little bit about the difference between closing the gap and building a budget?
So it's basically, at this point, it's basically the same thing, right? So, but I think what you're referring to is the prior efforts where we took last year's budget, increased it by known factors, and then compared it to a budget gap and started trying to make decisions about what we weren't going to spend on. But nothing had been built yet, right? So those were all estimates on what the future was going to look like. And it also made an assumption that the school budgets would not grow because we started with last year's budget. And the only way it would grow, the only increases were the COLA increases or step increases to the schools. But we added like 11 autism classes this year. Or for next year, and we added, I can't remember how many ESL teachers. So those things, the pie didn't get bigger, right? So the rest of the pies had to shiver smaller. What we should have done started sooner is building the budget in the software, adding it up, and then looking at the total, because we were kind of reverse engineering it backwards. And we got caught with one line item where something was included in the budget for the current year. And then they're like, oh, let's use it for the budget for next year. But that was a duplicate because you already started with this year's budget. So that was just that's kind of a dangerous way to do a budget building process. So, so when you're building the budget, you have your target, you run an extract on the budget software and figure out what everybody's asks are. And in my almost 2 years with this district, it has never been below the target.
I
I know,
hear
it's
you.
true, it's a fact.
Well, of
So this is normal. This is just
Right.
this is a bigger normal because of a couple things. Because ESSER happened and we got a lot of money. And then as our general fund, we had trouble because our costs are growing. We had trouble staying within the budget target. We started putting things in ESSER for allowable expenses. Every district in the country is dealing with this problem right now. The other issue is our state funding formula doesn't meet our needs financially. So, and when you have a district that's growing enrollment, so prior to COVID, we were growing 600 kids a year. And our funding sources weren't keeping up with that stream. So what it did is it took our revenues are half property taxes and half state funding formula. So our property taxes just got spread thinner and thinner for every new child we got.
So my question, the second question would be then if we close the gap, is closing the gap our budget?
By closing the gap, you will adopt a budget that meets the forecasted revenue. So yes.
So closing the gap is the budget.
It's activities to get you to a budget.
So
Closing the gap is a verb.
okay, so it's that being the case, closing the gap is telling us what we're not spending,
Correct.
right? And what we're not gonna spend money on. So my issue is then what we're gonna not spend money on, there's nothing then in this, for this coming year that we would be spending money that we didn't spend last year.
So no, because we need to grow our cash balance back. We're getting too low. So we have a budget every year. We underspend our budget every year because we always feel like we're gonna get more accomplished. We have a bunch of vacancies, turnover, that kind of stuff. So we've always underspent our budget. And there's always pressure to use that to go build next year's budget. So we did that during the strategic plan years, we were trying to invest heavily in the first and second year to get some quick outcomes academically. But we had an agreement that once we did that, we were going to go back to a balanced budget. And then we had some turnovers and things delayed. But so the past 3 years, our general fund budget has been higher than our revenue. So we're eating into that cash savings. And the cash balance is getting too low. So you can't use this year's underspending. The board can adopt a budget that's higher. Wouldn't be my recommendation. But we need this year's underspending to start rebuilding cash reserve because it's getting uncomfortably low.
Well, and we have to spend and cut and what have you to get ourselves ready for a preschool renewal and probably a permanent improvement levy.
That's correct. So
All right, but the reality is that's not just telling people how much we cut. It's also presenting to the community a vision of what the future of CPS is about and how we're making these things better for our students and our families. And, so you know where I'm going with this. In this, when we, there's no COPS, payment funds in this.
No, I mean, no, we haven't made. room
So
for
then
it.
we can't find a way to have any, restoration at, the Hughes Annex for having, and addressing the overcrowdedness in the, two Montessori high schools.
We have to cut more to make room for it.
Okay.
Yes.
But
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you sparked a thought.
Yep.
So a long-term financial strategy or a challenge that's gonna happen. Our preschool expansion has grown beyond the $15 million set aside,
Right.
right? And so we're using unspent funds to kind of keep it going.
Gotcha.
Both our preschool growth is driving an increase in kindergarten, which the next year is gonna be in first grade and second grade. So our primary challenges over the next 3 years is gonna be we're gonna need investment to support that growth in enrollment. As long as we continue to retain our kids. So that is more of a long-term strategy, but each year is gonna add a little bit more pressure to the primary grade level spend.
And that's exactly, I'm in complete agreement with you in that we are going to be spending more. We are not going to be spending less.
But
Because you're saying the growth with your preschool, or when we go back to the public and ask for more or the same or what have you, the reality is that we also have to be able to have enough classrooms. We have to address turning away families from CPS. And we've been turning away Montessori families, and we've now been turning away Spencer families. We have spending this tremendous amount of money on transportation. So I mean, I'm just trying to, with your point, the long-term thing is that we're going to be spending more money. And we are, I think, at least the majority of the board is committed to growth in this district. And the reality is those things are going to cost us. So assessing or trying to build that cash reserve, which is important, it's totally important. I buy it. I'm just saying, we can say that closing the gap gets us towards a budget, but the reality is that size of the budget or the size of closing the gap is not necessarily positioning us to absolutely go to the public, except by saying, oh, we're fiscally responsible again. But if we don't have a program to present, if we don't have forward movement, if we don't have growth, they're not going to say we need other buildings or we need to fix our current buildings. They're not. Right now, they wouldn't pass I don't think they would pass a preschool renewal after the property valuations that have hit this city. So we have to have a vision to express, not just that we overcame this crisis.
Agreed. And just a point of clarification though, just to recall, preschoolers, the state does not fund preschool.
Right.
So there's a lot of other funding sources that do that, but the more we grow preschool, the more pressure it gets on K-12.
Absolutely. And then they don't count our preschoolers in order to give us the amount of money that we ask or that we should get based upon enrollment, because they don't count the preschoolers.
Regular preschool is not included in the state funding formula.
Right.
Correct.
Mr. Craig.
I think there's also, the other aspect of this that we have to be thinking about long-term is also for conversation that Chief Burkhart brought to the table for us all, which is the need for facilities repairs.
Yep.
That in our long-term goals and long-term points of building up, we have to be more strategic than we've been in the past about it. But I think this actually gets a little bit into what Treasurer Wagner's been saying when we talked about even the strategic plan, is that we often make plans to do something really massive and we never sit down and say, how do we pay for all these things? And what are all the additional costs that will come to us afterwards? And be realistic about what we can and can't do with those things, right? So I'm reminded of a friend of mine who's in another district of Michigan. They built a huge jungle gym playground area. never budgeted for how you repair a jungle gym. So it's a big metal facade that has gone into disrepair to the point of which is now a danger to the students because they never budgeted for that. That's not a large budget item. It's not a huge concept. Right? And like we've talked about this before with folks who want to donate stuff to us, and then we have to then have the cost of that, the long-term cost of it. And so I think it is important for us to President Bolton's point of having a strategic thought to it. But I think that strategic thought also has to keep in mind what are the long-term costs, because I do think folks will support us to do things that are, revolutionary, that are amazing, and that are wonderful, if they know that we're not just going to do it now and not be able to do it, maintain it later, but that we have a plan to think about it 25 years from now, 15 years from now. Like we'll give you a little extra money to fix your roofs if you have a plan that every year this is what you're going to be doing continuously. And I think I've heard President Bolton say it a few times in the last couple of years in budget and finance, where we made a plan to do our facilities master plan for that particular point in time. And we didn't really make a plan that went beyond that particular point in time. And so I think that's something that is a goal in the next year's budget process also, is that we can allow that to be part of that conversation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Comments, questions? Thanks, Treasurer Wagner.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate it. I think, do I have a motion to approve the revised recommendations of the interim superintendent?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Moffett. Are there any questions or comments for the superintendent? Any discussion on the recommendations of the superintendent? Seeing none? Roll call.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Mapp,
Yes, with the exception of page 16, section E, line item 7.
line item 7,
Yes.
Dr. Moffett,
Yes.
Vice President Weinberg,
Yes.
President Bolton.
Yes. Do I have a motion to approve the revised report of the treasurer?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Anybody?
Second.
Thank you, Vice President. Any questions for the treasurer and her revised report? Seeing none.
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Mapp,
Yes.
Dr. Moffett,
Yes.
Vice President Weinberg,
Yes.
President Bolton.
Yes. Proposed consent agenda has been distributed. Treasurer Wagner, would you maintain the list of any exceptions and exception makers? The consent agenda has acceptance of committee reports and resolutions, consideration and acceptance of the consent agenda items. Are there any exceptions to the consent agenda? I'm loving this. All right, it's particularly short today, though. So that's part of our problem or part of our gift. With no exceptions, then I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as distributed.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Would you please call the roll for the passage of the consent agenda?
Mr. Craig,
Yes.
Ms. Mapp,
Yes.
Dr. Moffett, Vice President Weinberg,
Yes.
President Bolton.
Yes. Now we go to inquiries and updates from the administration. There were no items submitted for the agenda for inquiries or updates from the administration. So we'll move on to board matters, and we have a number of those to discuss. We'll start with Finance Chair, Mr. Brandon Craig. Governance, Professional Development from Council of Great City Schools. And I'm on that one too. Go ahead.
Well, I think we talked about it at the last meeting. I don't know if we want to do it today or not, with regard to us doing a self-evaluation. I think since we didn't send it out to everybody, I think maybe we can hold off until July.
Okay.
To do that, but I think if we're all committed to doing the form that we use in the past and doing the comparative, I think that's the next steps in that part.
Yes, and to that point, looking at the list, and I think you're right that we can hold off on that, but I think we did briefly talk about the fact that one of the coaching recommendations was to kind of come up with the 5 kind of guardrails or so regarding board behavior and board relationships. And I think that's something to carry forward too, as well as a couple of the other coaching items that were listed besides the self-evaluation. One of it was this unified voice, and that's the guardrail and behavior. Again, tracking board use of time, and I know Ms. Davis has been involved with that. And the other was a work session to, well, we did the agenda and we did the consent agenda. So right now it's the self-evaluation, maybe around July or so. Is that what you suggested?
Yeah, I think what would make sense is to give time to send out the board self-evaluation document out, because I actually don't believe member MAP was on when we did it the last time. So give people time to review it, review what all is contained within it, and then also solicit suggestions for board guardrails. And so we can send something out through Ms. Davis and Ms. Bruckner to have the board have a little homework assignment to be ready to discuss the board evaluation or the self-evaluation, but also to submit examples of board guardrails that they would want for us to discuss.
Super. I like doing both at the same time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That would be great. Member, oh, go ahead. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing this up. I do want to know if the information that will go out will have the previous score for the self-evaluation on it, so I can
Usually,
Yeah,
have
I
access to
can
that?
submit what I can make sure we send out the last one we did, which actually has 2 sets of scores on it, I believe. So
Okay, thank you.
it's great. Yes, ma'am.
Since we are bringing up the governance piece, I also would like to find out and inquire about Superintendent Murphy developing her own guardrails, because those guardrails were developed by the previous administration. And so I'm wondering, is this a space that, because the guardrails are to be devised by the superintendent, so would this be a space for invitation to Superintendent Murphy to devise her own or adjust, if necessary, her own guardrails to get to the goals that the board established?
do you mean the interim guardrails?
And yes,
Okay.
the guardrails that she can control. Yes.
We're not changing the goals or the guardrails,
No,
though.
no.
You're just.
To my understanding, the superintendent,
Tracking or
the
is that-
superintendent
Yes. you're-
owns the guardrails.
Okay.
Yes, not the board.
The superintendent owns the interim goals and interim guardrails.
Correct. The
Well,
interim.
dude, she's already
So-
called it.
So my question is around
Wow.
the previous interim guardrails and goals were established by the previous administration. And so I'm wondering, is this also a time for the new administration to look at and adjust, if necessary, the interim goals and interim guardrails as she sees fit? This came up because with respect to the committee meeting, we had a question around addressing some of the discipline data and the potential adjustment of meeting the guardrail, and how there is going to be some newness in how this administration is looking at things. So I said this would be a time for her to adjust those guardrails, because that's the responsibility of the superintendent. Are we saying that formally now?
Let me, you're not saying adjust the guardrails. We are adjusting the interim
Interim.
measurements.
I'm not saying we're adjusting anything. I'm saying the superintendent who owns the interim goals and interim guardrails, it was stated that that is owned by the administration, not the board, and how to get to the goal. So I'm wondering, since we're talking about this with regard to governance, shouldn't we, in our goals and guardrails, should we also extend the opportunity for the interim superintendent to adjust, if necessary, the interim goals and interim guardrails as she sees fit, this administration, because that's what the superintendent can control, the how to get to those goals that the board set.
And the pace at which we get to it.
Correct.
Vice President?
And so you're asking if necessary. So if Superintendent Murphy, she's looking at the interim goal and saying, it's not gonna work with the data or the, measurement that I'm utilizing. You're asking if currently, right now, she can then share that with us or when it approaches?
So I'm asking more relevantly, we got a report today around the seals and around graduation rate. Now, Superintendent Murphy said, really, that there tends to be an adjustment. It's low right now, so it's technically off track, but that it will usually pick up because that's been her historical perspective. I shared with her, well, then maybe you need to adjust that interim guardrail to reflect more what she would see. And so I want to make sure that I am advising her correctly that she has the autonomy to adjust interim goals and guardrails to meet the goal that the board has set, because
Right.
that has always been the superintendent's responsibility and purview. So I'm asking for clarification, is that not
Well,
correct?
actually, you can't, but the board could, per your suggestion, say that that if she would want to, or needs to, or sees any reason to, is what you're
Yeah,
saying,
that's what I was asking.
to
President Bolden.
adjust the just a minute, to adjust the interim. Again, we are not changing goals or guardrails. We are changing possibly the way that it's rated. Ben?
But we're not changing it. It's the
Right,
superintendent.
right.
Okay.
I'm using that royal we again. I have no interest in changing anything at this point in time. Ben?
Thanks, President Bolden. I think what Dr. Moffitt's describing makes a world of sense for the next superintendent to take a look at whether or not those interim guardrails are right or not right. We have an interim superintendent at the moment. And so my advocacy would be that we keep things unchanged until we have a next superintendent in place.
Okay. Mr. Craig?
Again, I think if the interim superintendent wants to present something, she can. I don't know that, so we need to encourage her to or not, because I think at this point, I don't know that that's the highest priority as to what we're dealing with. But if some point down the line, she wants to look at, and again, there are some things like, for instance, we use Panorama as part of the measuring tools on one of the interim guardrails, if that's something they want to adjust to. That comes back to the board to then approve what she suggests. But I don't know that we should be in a position of recommending her to change anything at this point, because that then kind of gets into that idea of us telling her to make a goal different than, or interim goal different. With, these are supposed to be driven by what's the document, this the data showing to them, what's the things that they want to do. And most of the interim goals and guardrails are really about student outcomes. And so that's, again, there's some measures that we may do differently because we're not using the tool anymore, and that's very fine. Or like, for instance, we were, using one tool to measure, like, iReady to measure one thing. Well, if we didn't use iReady anymore, then yeah, we probably have to adjust to figure out what that is. But on the others, I don't know that necessarily matches up. But again, I leave that to the superintendent to decide what she thinks is measuring best to meet to those goals and guardrails.
Superintendent Murphy?
What Board Member Craig is mentioning, Panorama is the one clear example I can think of. And then as I think and process through and reflect on the questions board members have asked the previous two meetings where Panorama data was shared, a lot of the questions were about process and decision-making for some of those tools that I was not a part of. So your questions have been very hard and very challenging. But based on what I believe I know, paying attention to your work over the last year is how I've been trying to respond to questions. So the one example I can think of that would be good for your consideration is with the Panorama piece.
And we talked about that last week, and you felt that you had other, I think you said other items, since we were using Panorama for some measurement along the way. You, I think, suggested one or two other options. So maybe listening to consensus is that as the superintendent sees those sorts of particular issues that might necessitate.
Sure, I just wanted to clarify, I didn't direct the superintendent to do anything. I said that it would come, that I believe
good
that we
thought.
would be coming, we could have this conversation, that in order for her to adequately be able to address some of our concerns, particularly around the seals is what we were talking about at that
Right.
moment, and the discipline data, that perhaps the interim goals and guardrails could be adjusted so that she would feel more comfortable. And this was the discussion point to do that. So I don't want it to, I want to clarify that I wasn't trying to direct the superintendent to do anything individually, but I do think it's prudent that we discuss this and that she gets some sort of formal clarification formally from this particular body. So it sounds to me like I wasn't directing you off track, but that if there are relevant
Staying
specific,
on
for
track.
sure. I just wanted to be clear that I'm not trying to direct anybody.
Mr. Craig, you have the next item, I think. Treasurer.
Yes, so it's upon us to start the process to decide kind of how we want to go about the search for the next treasurer. Although we can never replace the current treasurer, we shall do our best to try. I am not familiar with the last time we did a treasurer search. I'm assuming it was more, at least more than a decade ago or so, or around a decade ago or so.
Time flies when you're having fun.
But I think maybe this is one for our general counsel to provide some guidance as to how we would initiate, whether it's using a service again, as we did with the superintendent search. But I also want to, I kind of want to start this process early because I think we also are recognizing that it's going to be really, really difficult to find a treasurer in this state of Ohio climate. And so rather than end up with, you know, as President Bolton said last time, rather than end up with someone from the prison system, we should strive to get ahead of the game and also give those folks within the internal spaces or within areas we know of the opportunity to kind of really get a chance to apply, get a chance to prepare themselves for their applications out in the marketplace. So I think it's something for us, at least initially, get the process to figure out what we would do or what's been done in the past with regards to how to do a treasurer search.
And Mr. Craig, you've made the point that we don't want to be doing the same, be in a search for superintendent, same time search for treasurer. What kind of timeline are you thinking? This is based upon the date that we do know that Treasurer Wagner would be departing.
So, and this is where I think is some little bit of guidance as to if we're going to use an outside firm to do it like a nationwide search, it will take a little longer to both field the firm and then for them to do a search. And so I know, like, for instance, with the superintendent search last time, this was more than a year worth of work around it. I don't know that we need to do the same level of community outreach that was needed for the superintendent role. But I do think there are some things that we need to figure out as to what are the protocols that we are looking for in a person? What are the things that are those kind of, they need to be able to have experience doing this. They need to have skills with that. They need to have these things that maybe that's something we can do in concert with our current treasurer while she's still here to figure out what are those markers. But then also it just makes sense to potentially figure out what's the cost-effective way of either still doing a great search, but getting the best talent in without breaking the bank, because search firms aren't cheap. So
So for future planning, we really need to try to think in terms of when the start date would be.
yeah, so I mean, I think personally, I would like for us to have a decision made in the spring, like late spring of next year, at least by that time, so that we'd have time to do some transitioning through that process. But I wanted to make sure maybe if General Counsel Hoying can give us some guidance as to what was done in the past, or if there is any required things that we must do from the state, so that we don't get in trouble for those things also.
Don't want to get into trouble. We got enough to face.
Madam President, while he's walking up, may I say, just for anybody who's listening, the anticipated retirement date is September 1st of 25. It's not anytime in the near future, so I don't want any.
Fast. It will come quickly.
It will come quickly. The treasurer has to have a license from the state, so that's a requirement. Our previous search, when Treasurer Wagner was hired, I don't remember, you probably remember better than I do.
So they did a search when they hired Diana Witt.
I remember that.
That's the last time they did a search.
Is that OSBA?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, and there was not a search, I believe, when you were hired.
No, I was appointed as an interim and then asked to stay as a permanent.
There you are.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I think also maybe we can look into what some of the other districts have been doing recently.
Certainly.
Because again, I know that a few of them have had long searches for their treasurer, so finding out some of the best practices or what people are doing.
Be glad to report back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's see, Dr. Moffett, you have the next one.
So we have a joint Healthy Neighborhoods meeting with the city, and we have been doing that very successfully last year. And we were not able to get a meeting scheduled for May, but we are thinking of a tentative date. Actually, we're hoping for everyone to approve August the 6th. Put that on your calendar. We do have the vice mayor in the building. And we were thinking 5:30, wanting to ask the superintendent if you would be willing to do some research to see if we could host that, if the building is available August the 6th at 5:30. And then we could host it here. And Vice Mayor, was there anything else that you could think of? CPS will host it, and August the 6th, hold the date, 5:30. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, is this a public meeting of the board?
Yes, the
Okay.
board, at city
Yeah.
council and CPS.
Thank you.
It's the city council Healthy Neighborhoods meeting and the CPS board. And August the 6th, what day is that on? Let's fill us with Tuesday. There we go. So hold the date. I don't think we have anything conflicting, but we will announce it again, one or two more times. And for the public, they will be publicly broadcast. And also, if you could send Ms. Phyllis any particular topics that you may have. One topic that we thought about last month was how the city is addressing our increasing ESOL population, families that are coming to the city. And how that, I think Board Member Morosky brought up that there was an estimated 6,000 families coming to the city, and that would be impacting our educational system. So that's one area, but anything else that you all may have, feel free to send those topics to Ms. Phyllis.
And send that to Ms. Davis. That'd be great.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the next one, and that is what's already been alluded to today. We are going to need to meet on June 24th to pass an appropriations. And that will read as such.
So you'll pass two appropriations resolutions. One is the final one for fiscal year 24 to close out the year. And then the other one will be a temporary for 25 to get us started with the new year until we can finish the budget.
Does that have to be a 90-day? Can it be less than 90 days?
90 days is the max, so you can do up to 90 days. But it's not 90 days of value.
Right,
Okay.
right. Any questions or comments about that? I know it's not a regularly scheduled meeting, will we have a quorum to do that? Mr. Craig? Vice President? Checking? Checking?
I don't have a quorum. Not so well. One other thing that will be there, just to prepare you, will be all the contracts that need a July 1 purchase order date. So there will be a very thick treasurer's report on the 24th.
Are we sure we need all those contracts?
Those are the things that are going through the process.
Let's go through that list before that day.
Maybe it won't be so thin, so thick if we.
That's the plan. Those are all the contracts we've been reviewing, and these are the ones that have not been cut. So we're going back and make sure that some didn't
would
sneak
check
through.
those
Put them in the list to go back and review.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then I think I have this one, which is, and if somebody's in the audience that can help us with this, we've been asked, Ms. Davis, is it to have board videos, that the Public Affairs is going to be working on some individual board videos. And they've sent out to all of us some times that could work for all of us individually, some comment. Please return those requested times or suggested times to Public Affairs. Are there any assignments? Mr. Craig? No, Superintendent, you don't get to assign.
So one is an assignment back to myself to send out the self-evaluation as well as the request for board guardrails. The other assignment was the request to General Counsel Hoying to bring back or to submit to us previous used practices for the search, as well as any other practices used throughout the state, so we can make a determination as to what's the best course of action for us to use to do our treasurer search.
Just to add to that, doesn't Treasurer Whiter, doesn't OASBO have some role to play? Is that the right group? Is that your professional group in Ohio?
The Ohio School Board, what's it called? School Business Officials is what it's called. Yeah, it's OASBO. Yeah.
Is that who General Counsel, is that, we don't know? Or?
So they do there's a group from there that does a search. I know that Chris Moore's organization, K-12 Consulting, does searches.
Okay.
I've used him on assistant treasurer positions before.
There you go.
I can't think of who else does it. But I can ask my treasurer colleagues. I meet
That
with
would
them
be
on Thursday
great.
morning.
Share that with General Counsel. I think that would work. Other assignments? I have one assignment. It's kind of multiple and it would cost money. But we've talked about this a number of times and it's been on a number of lists about trying to have a property evaluation of the properties that we have that are not currently being used as such. And I know that General Counsel has a list of those several properties. And if General Counsel, if it's okay with the rest of the board, I think it would be important for us to see the expense and the value of our assets regarding real estate. So I'd like to make that assignment to General Counsel. Maybe as you find out how much money it is, we can rethink it, but maybe we can prioritize which properties those might be to get the evaluation. But right now it's that list that you have produced for us any number of times. Is that okay with the rest of the board? Yep. Thank you very much. Well, Superintendent, did you have anything particular that you needed to say?
No, my timing might be off. I was only going to ask if it would be all right if I also brought recommendations Monday.
Yes, we'll be here. We're allowed to vote.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay.
That's great. Appreciate it. The chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
By unanimous consent, we are out of here. Thanks, everyone.